Regular meeting of the Board of Education. It's both an organizational meeting as well as at 7:30 we will start the regular meeting. But for the organizational meeting, we have present Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick. Mr. Convertito is out of the state with family. Ms. Donna Carnell, Mrs. Jessica Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Paul Fattabine, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly, Mr. John Llewellyn, and Mr. Mark Patton. If I could have you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As you know, at the organizational meeting, we turned the beginning of the meeting over to Dr. Teitel to serve as temporary chair. So we need a motion for that effect, which is that in accordance with the bylaws, Superintendent Dr. David Teitel will serve as temporary chairman secretary during the election of board officers. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Ms. Carnell. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. You're in charge.
Okay. The first position is Board of Education Chairman. Does anybody have a nomination? Ms. Carnell.
I nominate Mr. Paul Fattabine.
Okay. Do you accept? I accept. He accepts. Any other nominations? Mark. Oh, Mr. Patton, sorry. I'm new at this.
My friends call me Mark, it's okay.
Okay.
I nominate Mr. Phil Dwyer for chair.
Okay, you accept?
Yes, I do.
All right, any other nominations? All right, nominations are closed. We have two nominees. So all those in favor of Mr. Fattabine, raise your hand. Ms. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Llewellyn. All those in favor of Mr. Dwyer. Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Patton. So it's 4-4. So right now, we don't have a chairman. I'll get to the, well, all right, let's go on to the next one. See if we have any better luck. So the floor is open for nominations for Board of Education Vice Chairman. Is there a nomination? Ms. Lou McCormick.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Carnell.
Do you accept?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other nominations for Vice Chairman? No other nominations for Vice Chairman? Okay. All those in favor of Ms. Carnell as Vice Chairman?
I think Mr.
Oh,
Fattabine.
sorry. What?
I'll nominate Phil Dwyer.
Phil, do you accept? No, he does not accept. So the only nominee is Ms. Carnell. So we need to vote. All those in favor of Ms. Carnell as Vice Chair, raise your hand. Ms. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Fattabine. I'm waiting. Wait time is an art of teaching. Okay. All those opposed? The other four. That's 4-4. So we don't have a Vice Chairman. Let's try Secretary. Is there a nominee for Board of Ed Secretary? Mr. Patton.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Jessica Gerber for secretary.
Do you accept?
Yes.
Yes. Any other nominees for Secretary? No. All right, one nominee for Secretary. Did you want to nominate somebody?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll nominate Mr. Llewellyn.
Do you accept?
I do not, thank you.
Okay, he declines. So we have one nominee for Secretary. Mrs. Gerber is the nominee. We'll take a vote. All in favor of Mrs. Gerber, raise your hands. Mrs. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Patton. All those opposed? Ms. Lou McCormick and Mr. Llewellyn. So that is a 6-2 vote. Mrs. Gerber, you are the one and only officer elected tonight. Under the bylaws of the board, which I've been scrutinizing, when there's no chairman or vice chairman, if there's or if they're both absent, then the secretary becomes the acting chair for that meeting until such time as officers are nominated. And then we will put this item, I think what will end up happening, have to check, but we'll put the election of officers on the next regular meeting of the board and see if we can elect officers at that time. This happened to me in another district, so I'm more than familiar with this. This is not the first time it's ever happened in the world. I will say that there is a statutory guideline on this. Should the board not be able to reach an agreement on a chairman, then the statute provides that the Board of Selectmen would appoint the chairman. That's the default in the statute. So that's how it could play out.
Do our bylaws address this specifically, or do the town statutes address this specifically?
The statute in the state
Right.
addresses this specifically.
But do the town bylaws?
I don't know.
address
I just checked the statute.
Okay.
So we can look at that
it?
between
Because
now
I
and
thought
then.
I'd heard, and I think it was actually Mr. Dwyer who had said this to someone else, that it goes to the RTM.
Well, the legislation is very clear that it goes to the selectmen. So I don't think that the town would be able to trump that. But we can check,
Okay,
and we'll see
thank
what
you.
happens. But if it's, the statutory language is very clear on that matter. So, and while we do have a special meeting Monday, generally speaking, you'd elect officers at a regular meeting as opposed to a special meeting, although I believe all 9 board members are planning to be at the special meeting. Probably is better form. But you could do it at the special meeting on Monday if you wanted to. Since I only have one officer to talk to, I guess Jessica and I can talk. But we need to get, Monday's agenda needs to be out tomorrow because the office closes Thursday and Friday and the meeting is Monday. So the agenda, and because it's a special meeting, it isn't like it can be added to the agenda that night. So if we want to elect officers on Monday, when we expect all 9 to be here, I need to get that on the agenda that goes out from our office tomorrow. So we don't have time to dawdle on this. The default will be, I will do it on the 9th. Is there a particular pleasure on that?
Makes sense.
I would say as long as you have the same board, the full board, that whether it's the 1st or the 9th makes no difference. I think that the sooner the better, and December 9th, in my opinion, is fine. I mean, December 1st, the first.
If everybody's going to be here. I believe everybody is expected to be here for the first. I know that Mr. Convertito will be back, so as long as everybody here is nodding, then we know we have everybody. But
Is she actually in charge now?
I don't know.
Well, she is.
I'm just prattling on. Go ahead.
So I
It's
would-
over to you, Mrs. Gerber.
I would accept the first as well.
First is fine for me. Do we want to just,
I may not be able to be here on the 1st.
Oh, you won't?
Well, yeah, Mondays are a problem for me.
Okay, then we'll do it on the 9th.
all right.
I think that's
Fair enough.
appropriate.
Okay. All right, I'm done.
Okay. All right, well, we'll move on to the next item, which is approval of the ad hoc committee bylaws. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the ad hoc committee changes to the bylaws as presented. We have a mover? Mrs. Lou McCormick?
Second it?
Mr. Llewellyn? Okay, I guess, do we want to, yes, Mr. Dwyer?
Could I ask to divide the question? There are 3 different proposals, and could we act on each one
Okay.
separately?
Mr. Dwyer wishes to divide the question into 3 separate motions.
I think there's Proposal A, Proposal B, and
I'll second that. That's fine.
Divide to 2, correct?
I'm not
thought
sure
it was
that,
Well, there's a
two.
third one. There's a strategic plan.
yeah, there's a Proposal B that has on one of the pages, and then another Proposal B that is a separate amendment. So I assume that there were 3 different amendments, because one is for Bylaw 8450, and the other one is Bylaw 8460. So I was assuming that there are 3 different actions.
Okay, well, so we'll just say we'll divide it into 3, and that's Mr. Dwyer and Mrs. Lou McCormick. Okay, so now that we, Okay, so now that we're going to divide the question, so we'll have first proposal A.
Point of order, do we not, when you're if there's a motion to divide the question, do we not need to vote on dividing the question if
Okay,
there is a
we'll
motion?
vote.
I can live with it being one. I just thought it would
about-
be easier, but I can live with it being one. I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, so we're back to, oh, yes, Ms.
I make a
Cornell.
motion, we divide it into 3.
I'll second.
Okay, so that's Ms. Cornell. Okay, so then we need to vote on that. So the motion is to divide the question into 3 parts. Okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a vote. Those who wish to divide the question.
Can I ask you one question, though, before we do this? Were these not originally 3 separate motions? These were originally brought forward to the board as 3 separate motions anyways, so I don't even know why we need to divide it. They were 3 separate motions that were all deferred.
Right, well, I guess the question is that there weren't actually specific motions, like we have motions in other parts of the agenda, so I guess since the entire presentation was given to us in one unit, I guess there was an understanding that that was one thing, but if you feel that it needs to be in 3, I'm not sure technically if there's a need to divide the question, or if we are dealing with each of the 3 separately.
They're 3
I mean,
separate.
I think the 3 separate as well.
See, 'cause-
3 separate.
Well, I guess the only question is that the recommended motion is to approve the ad hoc committee changes to the bylaws as presented. That is the motion. So that basically incorporates all of the changes. That's the way the motion reads.
Point of clarification, who actually wrote the motion? Who drafted the motion for the agenda?
Isn't this a carryover from the last meeting? This is the same motion that was on the October,
Right.
No,
so
we
these are-
didn't have a motion
you're
for the
right,
last
you're right.
meeting. It was only an item for discussion.
So
Yes,
I
Mr.
think-
Dwyer. Oh, I'm sorry.
The practice that we've had in the past, we take individual votes on each of the motions, and then we pass a final motion, which is this one that's on the agenda. This is the standard motion phrase that's on the agenda, that once we act on each individual one, then we pass a motion that says we've accepted the bylaws as amended. And so my guess is that this was written from that perspective. I didn't write it. I suspect that it was just pulled a carryover from other agendas.
It was, and I think the intent, as Ms. Lou McCormick said, was that it was 3 because that's the way it was a year ago when we started the process.
So since this motion is on the floor, I would imagine that dividing the question is the proper motion, and we act on that.
So, yes, Mr. Fattabine.
I guess I would just analyze to the extent that there was a committee formed, an ad hoc committee formed that made a report and a recommendation, and that was the report presented to the body. And that motion's on, in my interpretation, on the floor now. So I think a motion to divide that report to 3 different portions, in essence, each of the proposals, is appropriate and can be voted up and down each one, instead of as a whole. I think the motion itself is proper because that's, the written motion is proper in that it's the report of the committee that's being acted upon. And to separate that is also a proper motion if approved by the board, to divide it up into 3 different questions and then vote on each one independently. There's no obligation for the body as a whole to adopt the whole report, but can adopt portions as it sees fit, and the motion to divide, I think, is appropriate for those reasons.
Okay, anyone else to discussion of this? Yes, Mrs. Maxon-Connelly.
just as one last thing, I had made the motion to divide this back in December, and it was defeated in an 8-1 vote, so, or excuse me, a 1-8 vote. So at that time, I tried to divide it, and it was rejected. So I'm not sure why we're now back on what I had seen ahead of time last December as a need to separate this, but
What? No, but these were all different motions. So one motion was made by Mr. Llewellyn, one proposal was made by myself. These were completely separate motions submitted by different people. So I don't know why they would have been bundled. They were separate exhibits.
I'll pull out the minutes and be happy to show you, but in December, I made the motion to divide the question.
Well, we still have a motion moved by Ms. Cornell and seconded by Mrs. Lou McCormick to divide the question into 3 parts. So we should act on that then. So those in favor of dividing the question, raise your hand. Okay, unanimous, 8-0. All right, so now we need to make an amendment, have the first motion, which I guess would fall under Proposal A. So I guess what we would need then would be to have a specific motion, and I guess I'm asking Mrs. Lou McCormick as chair of the ad hoc committee, if you have specific language as a motion that we could have, because we have one full page here, so which part of this do you wish to have as your motion?
I will let Mr. Llewellyn make this motion since this was originally his amendment.
Okay, Mr. Llewellyn, do you have a motion?
Sure. I move that the board accept 8100 responsibilities of the board as it is written.
Mr. Llewellyn, can I suggest that you're actually crossing out the existing language and substituting it for the other, so you may want to
Thank
phrase
you.
it that way.
To replace the prior language. Thank you very much.
Can you speak up, because it would be very hard to hear
To replace the prior language.
the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yeah, if you could repeat, please.
Sure. I make a motion to accept the proposed language 8100 responsibilities of the board to replace the existing responsibilities of the board 8100 section B.
Okay, so that is a motion. Do we have a second? Mrs. Lou McCormick? Okay, do you have any comments you wish to make, or should we just go to discussion on the board? Anything you wish to
Let's go
clarify?
to discussion.
Discussion, okay. Anyone wish to discuss on this motion? Yes, Mrs. Lou McCormick?
We've said this before, but I'll reiterate for the benefit of the audience that's here. The reason we are amending the language is that before the responsibilities of the board language is very brief and general, and does not fully describe the responsibilities of the board as defined by the Connecticut Association Boards of Education. So if we look at the state's Board of Education kind of guidance, this is how they briefly assign the responsibilities of the board, and the verbiage that we took to put within our bylaws is directly lifted from CABE. And we actually made sure with senior attorneys at CABE that it would be appropriate to put within our bylaws, and they could see no reason why it should be a problem. We held several sessions to discuss this with the public. We had 3 different sessions, actually, and had various feedback. Some people were concerned, in fact, that this overstepped the boundaries of what the Board of Education has done here in Fairfield in the past. And I would say that there are others that said it's about time that we are doing something and that it's time for a change, and it's good that we have created more definition. And after having met with other Board of Education members at various conferences and discussed what they do within their towns, it becomes clear to me that the language that is used is very appropriate, and I think will give better specificity and guidance to the board as to what the scope of the responsibility of a Board of Education should be in an ideal situation.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wish to comment on this item? Yes, Mr. Patton?
I took this wording and showed it to several CABE officials at the conference a few weeks ago, and they were actually not of the same opinion as Ms. Lou McCormick, that some of this stuff has been lifted from an overview and not the actual CABE manual, and then things like developing in collaboration with the superintendent, it's like bullet point number 4 or 5, it's number 6, approving and monitoring implementation of the budget. The developing part of it is not in CABE's rules. According to the state statutes and CABE, Board of Eds don't develop the budget. Budgets are developed by paid professionals in administrations. Budgets are approved and overseen by the boards, but not developed. So I will not be in favor of this motion.
Yeah, anyone else? Mr. Llewellyn?
Yeah, I'd like to just comment in terms of, moving back toward what is a more standard and more robust set of bylaws here, which is what we've tried to model after the CABE. And I think the district has a habit of taking other CABE documents and eliminating pieces that probably shouldn't be eliminated. And I'm not sure why we've boiled it down to such a smaller subset of these, but I think the added language is actually beneficial. Another document that we have here is the CABE Code of Ethics. And the Code of Ethics, the district seems to have struck several key phrases from. So if you go and look at ours and then go out and look at CABE, we've struck, in fulfilling my responsibilities, I think, of children first. And there's some other things that have been struck that would perplex an individual as to why they'd be struck. This was struck. I will strive to bring any needed change only through legal and ethical procedures. I will support the needed change in our schools. These are things that were struck from ours, so we have an abridged version. I think we need to get back to a more standard set of responsibilities, and we need to understand exactly what the obligations of this board are and the rules that should govern the board. I think we should be asking questions. I think we should be more involved. And I think that this gives more specificity.
Yes, Mrs. McCormick.
And I would put forth to Mr. Patton that if he does not like the word developing, and if that is the one word that seems to rub him the wrong way, to propose language that you think is more robust.
Okay, yes, Mr. Fattabine, and then Mr. Dwyer.
Well, I'll give my short view on bylaws, I guess, but in general, bylaws are sort of the governing document of the Board of Ed. I'm not sure they should have substantive provisions in it per se, in detail. I think in general, bylaws should not be any more restrictive or detailed than necessary. They're a short, concise document that govern the way the body of the board works. So while some of these, the wording, I think, is supported by CABE clearly, and which is makes good sense in general, I just don't believe that the appropriate place to place them is in the bylaws. So that's why I'm not going to support this motion.
Mr. Dwyer.
I, too, was able to talk with CABE. They don't recommend this as the best practice recommended by CABE. Some of the information did come from a document, So You Want to Become a Board Member, which is not designed as a template for bylaws. I agree with Mr. Fattabine that there are laudable statements in here, but they don't belong in the bylaws.
Okay, yeah, Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Yeah, one more comment is that it's been mentioned to me that why aren't we taking language from the governance letter from, I don't know, 2002 or some very dated document, and I reviewed that, and I would say that if we wanted to take the language from the governance document, which I think goes beyond the scope of what we want to accomplish here, we could do that. However, there are things within that governance document that I would think this district would be loath to entertain, such as that the Board of Ed would have the right to hire or, I guess, confirm appointments to any administrative position, and that often is a standard within most boards of education. And if not that, at least from the level of principal and higher, which at this point the board does not participate, my understanding at all that I've seen to date, whereas most other districts do participate in the hiring of administrative personnel. And secondly, I would say that though we are reluctant to make changes, these actually follow very closely the existing responsibilities of the board that are defined within our current bylaws. They voice them slightly differently and probably a little more comprehensively. So for example, instead of just employ an able and qualified superintendent, period, this says select, retain, and evaluate the superintendent of schools who serves as the district's chief executive officer and implements board policy. Perhaps no single decision a board makes has more impact than the selection of the superintendent. So even though the second part may be extra, the select, retain, and evaluate has very specific governance for the Board of Education and what our role is versus just employ. If we just did what our bylaws said, all we have to do is employ someone and that's it. However, this says we select, we retain, and we evaluate. Similarly to building the public support and understanding of public education, this means communicating and interpreting the school district's mission to the public, listening to the community, and, when appropriate, incorporating citizens' views into the discussions and actions of the boards. And I'll compare and contrast that to what we have currently, which is basically, in collaboration with the administration, communicate the school district's educational program to the community, period. Very, very different feelings, and I think sentiments that govern the spirit of what the Board of Education and their objective in working with the community should be. I could go on for each of these. I don't necessarily think it's necessary at this point. My point being that how we word these items, they are very parallel to what we have currently. However, the spirit under which they are written and the content and just slightly increased specificity makes a big deal as to how the Board of Ed operates.
Mr. Llewellyn.
One last comment, actually, because I think they're important and it's really easy to hide behind, they don't work. I moved to divide these 7 bullets once again so we can actually discuss each one and understand why people object to them, because I think that would be an interesting way to kind of move through this as opposed to voting them all up or down. So I make a motion to divide.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to divide into 7 separate items within Proposal A. Yes, Mr. Dwyer?
I think we can adopt or reject this in whole, and I'm not in favor of dividing the question at this. I'm not in favor of dividing the question at this level.
Okay, so we have a motion to divide 7 separate items from Proposal A, and so those in favor? Okay, it's Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn. Those opposed? Okay, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, and Mr. Patton. So the motion fails. Okay, so we're back to the original motion. Are there any further comments on that motion? Okay, this is a bylaw, so we do not go to public comment, so we will have a vote on this motion. Those in favor? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn. Those opposed? Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, and Mr. Patton. The motion fails 3-5. Okay, so we are now on to Proposal B. And I'm not sure, Mrs. Lou McCormick or Mr. Llewellyn, if one of you wishes to make a specific motion regarding this language for Proposal B, that would be 8450.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the short-term goals, objectives, and action plans, and to add the Board of Education bylaw 8450 to our current bylaws.
Second.
Okay. 8450 to bylaws. Sorry, I'm wearing 2 hats.
Actually, I should point something out here because you're doing double duty. You may want to do this for the regular meeting that follows, is it would be probably a good idea for the board to elect an acting secretary so that Jessica's not trying to run the meeting and take the notes.
Okay, that's fine with me.
I think that's allowable. I believe that's permissible.
Okay. Okay, so do we have any discussion on this agenda item? Yeah, Mrs. Lynn McCormick.
Just for the benefit, again, of people who are attending this meeting, since I'm not sure if everyone has a copy of this. But the objective of this amendment is to more clearly define the process by which the Board of Education, in cooperation with the superintendent, shall operate in setting its short-term priorities for the year via measurable goals, objectives, and action plans. Now, I refer to this, clearly the board just voted down the last the last series of responsibilities of the board, but within that was a very important element which CABE specifically references, and almost every other reputable district I know incorporates, which is that they shall develop, implement, and monitor the district's policies, including short and long-term goals. These policies serve as the roadmap for the school district. They give direction to the administration and staff and become the foundation for accountability. Accountability is a big buzzword these days, and so important to figure out ways for our district to become better and to become more accountable for the actions that we take and how to improve student achievement. This was one way in which I thought that the board could make itself more effective in that pursuit. So, just for clarification, the first item was that the board shall actually formulate and approve, no later than the first meeting in June, specific short-term goals and objectives which define the district's priorities for the following academic school year, with related action plans formulated in collaboration with the superintendent by the start of the academic school year. The second was, the Board of Education's short-term Board of Ed goals, objectives, and action plans shall be in alignment with the Board of Ed mission statement, long-term educational goals, as well as the school district's 5-year strategic plan, so it was to be consistent. Thirdly, the Board of Education annual short-term goals and objectives shall address, and this, just so you know, I took from one of our neighboring districts, who I later learned took it from another neighboring district, all of which are top districts within Connecticut. So they use the same format to guide their goal setting. And so those goals would be student achievement, fiscal management, Board of Education effectiveness, human resources, facilities, and other special objectives. And this would require the board every year to consider whether there were goals and objectives in each of these years that we should put forth and try to follow through on. Fourth, these Board of Ed goals, objectives, and action plans shall strive to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and define a specific time frame. Very common, and I think consistent with how our district works in setting goals. The Board of Ed shall, in collaboration with the superintendent, review progress towards achieving the stated short-term goals and objectives in each December, March, and June respectively. And then finally, the Board of Ed shall review every December, March, and June respectively reports by district and individual schools to include measurable results related to school climate and student achievements in all subjects. These are all things that I would have thought would be common sense. However, I have found that things get busy and we tend to sometimes omit and forget and not be able to fit in the things that we should be focusing as a priority to focus on student achievement. And my hope was that we would be amenable to incorporating this kind of concept so that we would never be permitted to forget our top responsibility, which is student achievement.
Okay, any comments on this? Yes, Mr. Llewellyn.
I'd like to move to divide into the 6 as well.
Okay, so the motion is to divide Proposal B into 6 separate items. Second, Ms. Connell. Okay, so the motion is to divide Proposal B into 6 separate items. I'll have a vote. Those in favor? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Cornell, Mr. Llewellyn. Those opposed? Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fadabine, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, and Mr. Patton. The motion fails, 3-5. Okay, so we're back to the original. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fadabine.
Yeah, I guess we're going back to general comment about the motion?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the original motion.
The original motion, yeah. I'll indicate my, these are the bylaws. And while these are important topics, I think that, warrant discussion and in some cases even warrant action, we do set board goals. But if there's any elaboration on this, I think the more proper forum would be a recommended either motion or policy and on an individual basis and have that discussion. I just don't think this kind of detail and specificity is desirable for a bylaw, and as well as causes problems in the future. Bylaws are generally shorter documents, general statements, the way the organization runs itself and what controls them. These are just too specific, in my opinion, to be in bylaws, so I can't support this as a bylaw. But certainly, it's not to say that this may not surface again in some other form or some other means by motion or policy, but I can't support it in a bylaw.
Okay. Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Just to be clear, so we tried to raise these similar types of issues within the goals and objectives for the board, and they were not even brought for discussion. So, so we can't bring it up there because nobody will discuss these important issues. Secondly, my understanding of bylaws is that those are the policies that guide the Board of Education. Those are the policies that govern the Board of Education. The other policies govern the district, the teachers, the administrators, the students. The bylaws are the policies that govern the Board of Education, and therefore, that is the place to insert policy that governs the Board of Education. There is no other place in the policy guidelines, my understanding is, that would put requirements upon the Board of Education. The place to put that is within the bylaws. So perhaps if you prefer them to be less specific, we'd be happy to entertain amendments to the language that incorporate the spirit. If you're interested in dividing any of these and considering any one of them, we'd be happy to consider them as well. But I feel that there's been a stagnation within the district on our ability to implement policy that actually changes and improves where we are to improve our effectiveness, not just to leave it as where it is. And bringing everything more and more general every year, to me, is not necessarily an improvement. To me, sometimes, you need specificity, you need more clarity, because that brings people to the same page.
Mr. Dwyer and Mr. Llewellyn.
I would agree with Mr. Fattabine. A strategic planning process, in my mind, is more dynamic, and by putting it in the bylaws in this fashion, it doesn't allow for each board to look at what its needs are. We have a well-developed 5-year strategic initiatives planning process in process this year. And so I think many of these types of statements are going to be coming out of that. In fact, we have a meeting set up already to talk about the metrics on which we will be measuring this. So I would agree with Mr. Fattabine that this is too much detail for a bylaw.
Well, just to clarify, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because there is the third proposal is the one that deals with the strategic plan. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I was looking at the right one. Okay, Mr. Llewellyn.
Thank you. For example, if we look back at number 3, the Board of Education's annual short-term goals and objectives shall address student achievement, fiscal management, Board of Education effectiveness, human resources, facilities, and other special objectives. That's a list that's very bullet point. There's not a whole lot of there are not a whole lot of words there. It is very, very similar to Darien, Westport, New Canaan, all who outperform us on an annual basis. It's very different from board goals that are put forth in order to fulfill, political promises. So I think that this puts student achievement first and fiscal management right up in the top. So I do think we need something like this for this board.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
First of all, I'm not sure which goals you're talking about that are meant to fulfill political promises. I can't think of one goal that we've been talking about whose purpose was anything other than advancing the district and advancing student achievement. And anything I've stood behind, if I ever talked about it in any other venue, it was always with an eye towards student achievement. Nor do I understand Mrs. Lou McCormick's point that never should we be permitted to forget that we are here for student achievement. I personally don't need that reminder. I know exactly why I'm here, and it's what I talk about at every meeting. So I'm not sure who it is at this table that needs that reminding, but that's another subject. I also think we've received a number of letters on this motion in particular, which I think have raised some very valid points. I look at number 6, I look at number 5, and I think about the inordinate amount of work that our board bylaw would be requiring of the district, impeding their ability to do in the classroom what we all want them to be doing while they're busy manufacturing reports for us. And if this were to pass, and this board is essentially saying there is very little trust, and I'm not willing to take that position, that I do not trust that the work is not being done. I absolutely expect to see verification of that at the end of the year, which is what we get currently now in the course of our evaluation. But to need these 3 reports a year, while this is a simple sentence here, I can assure you that the work that would go into this from staff, from the teachers themselves, producing the data for this, that's not the nature of how data teams are certainly supposed to be working. And this would be an inordinate amount of work and, in fact, would impede student achievement. So I would not be in favor of this.
Mr. Llewellyn.
On that point alone, this is what a lot of the top-performing districts do. So I'm not sure if we received a single report last year that had any detail in it as to student achievement on any measure that had detail enough to get behind it.
Mrs.
So
Maxim-
I think it is something that's necessary.
Mrs. Maxon-Canelli.
We received not only last year but this year AP recognition, which is a nationally recognized award, which is very specific, comes with a very specific number, and points to the achievement of this district, which, by the way, I'm not so sure that New Canaan and Darien appeared on that.
And excuse me, may I follow up on that, please? And if you look at that, our percent of 4s and 5s have dropped over the last several years in trends. So we didn't receive trendings, but if you go and you get the specific data behind it and you do the analytics, you find out that actually our number of 4s and 5s have dropped. Our 3s have gone up, which is commendable, but we're not getting the full story. We need to have detailed metrics provided to this board.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're kind of getting off topic here, which is the motion before us. Do we have any other comment? I guess I would just take a moment to say that while obviously we know that Darien and Westport and Hicksville all have very strong districts, what we're using here are not their bylaws. We're using their district goals and objectives. I actually looked at these districts' bylaws, and they are not as specific as these. So that would be my issue with supporting this. Yes, Mrs. Lynn McCormick.
And so for that very reason, this is why I feel that though they don't need it in their bylaws, because their board is in fact doing what we believe should be done within their day-to-day or month-to-month actions, we are not necessarily taking the same steps, if that makes sense, in how we approach things. And I believe that there is, as in any district, room for improvement. And these are some suggestions which I believe that if we started creating a process by which we did regularly monitor progress, regularly monitor reports, and have short-term goals that we look to, and maybe we don't complete them by the end of the year, but we should understand why and have the rationale, and everyone should be on board with the researches. We should all be on the same page, and usually traveling together by having ongoing progress reports makes a lot of sense. Now, I would love to say that we don't need to have these in our bylaws. We should just be doing this anyways, but as we know, we are not doing this anyways. Therefore, when you are not doing it, that is when you start creating rules. You create rules when things that you think should be done are not being done, and you want to make sure that they are being done.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Patton.
I'm going to echo Mr. Convertito, who's not here at the moment, but I think he'd probably appreciate the sentiment that we keep getting comparisons to other towns, which may or may not be appropriate, and as Mrs. Gerber has pointed out, these specifics are not in bylaws, they're in goals or other documents. And bylaws, as Mr. Fadabian has pointed out, are meant to be general for the governance of boards. They're not meant to have specific details like this and nitpicky little things like short-term goals. I think what Mr. Convertito would appreciate is that it seems like that the gist of this bylaw amendment or the rationale behind it is lack of trust to the administration, which I don't think is the case, or transparency, or it's just very frustrating to read something like this, to get things like short-term goals being shoehorned into bylaws where they don't belong because some members don't feel that the district isn't doing their job, where other members do feel the district is doing their job. So we could have that argument till the cows come home. But the bottom line is these things don't belong in bylaws, and we're here to discuss bylaw amendments.
Can I
Mrs. Lynn
just
McCormick.
respond to that? Because I'm not including actual short-term goals within the bylaws. All we are stating is that we shall have the process of having short-term goals, which we currently do not have.
Mrs. Maxon-Canelli.
We do have a process of short-term goals. We've adopted short-term goals, including the adoption of a long-range strategic plan. And that incorporates everything on here in terms of our expectations for the district, the metrics by which those expectations would be measured. So we are focused on student achievement. It was the only goal we all very quickly agreed to and had no discussion on. We knew that that needed to be our focus. We're doing a long-range strategic plan. We have adopted that goal.
Well, I will still say that there's room for improvement, and I believe that this is a step towards improvement. We can defend what we have. We have a good system. We can always be better. This is an attempt to be better, to look towards something better, and we all have to be open-minded that everyone has room for improvement. And therefore, if we're constantly closed to change, how can you move forward? I'm concerned that we're going to stagnate because everyone is so defensive of the current position we're in, which is granted very good. However, there's always room to be better.
Okay, any further comments on this item? Okay, we will take a vote now. So the motion is to approve short-term goals, objectives, and action plans and add 8450 to the bylaws. Those in favor? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn. Those opposed? Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fadbean, Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, and Mr. Patton. The motion fails 3-5. Okay, we are going on to the final proposal. Mrs. Lou McCormick or Mr. Llewellyn, if you have wording that you want to use to make this a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to add the amendment of bylaw 8460 regarding strategic plan. And just as color, this
Okay, well, let me just get that on the table. So that's moved by Mrs. Lou McCormick, second by Mr. Llewellyn. Oops, sorry. Okay, Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Okay, so the rationale. Like the others, this amendment is created to support the checks and balances of good policy that link long-term planning and management tools to realize short-term results. This supports more effective maneuvering and raises accountability for the effectiveness of the board's governance by policy. And if I were to read it, it says, in November of each year, the Board of Education shall review the district's 5-year strategic plan, which we currently don't do. We don't review the 5-year district plan annually. The board, in cooperation with the superintendent, will publicly assess the progress of the existing plan, discuss intended outcomes, and recommend adjustments to the superintendent that shall be required due to changes from year to year to include, but not be limited to, student or employee demographics, legislative, regulatory climate, or educational requirements. So what this is really meant to do is to say that every year we shall review the strategic plan, and that we're going to review it, assess it, decide whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Are we meeting those goals? Should there be adjustments to it? And it sounds so obvious. To me, I would have thought that we'd be doing it, but since it's something that we seem not to consistently do, I believe that it needs to be part of the bylaws to make sure that we do, in fact, do it.
Okay, any comments on this agenda item? Mr. Dwyer.
We review strategic district initiatives every year in conjunction with the superintendent, both in September and during his annual review. We have a 5-year plan process that's in place that I suspect will include a process under which to review that plan, and so I think we ought to let that take its course, and I think we'll find that some of the sentiments in here will show up in the strategic plan, which is where they belong, not in bylaws.
Okay, any other comments on this? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote. So it is to add amendment regarding strategic plan, bylaw 8460. Those in favor? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Llewellyn. Those opposed? Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fadbean, Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, and Mr. Patton. The motion fails 3-5. Okay. So I believe that is the end of our bylaw committee discussions. So with that said, I guess we'll
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Dwyer makes a motion to adjourn. Ms. Carnell second. Those in favor? Mr. Fadbean, thank you. Okay. 8-0, unanimous. Okay, so we will adjourn for a moment, and then we will start our regular meeting. Thank you. Roll call. Present tonight is Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxim Kennelly, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Patton. We have 2 student representatives with us tonight. So if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, so our first agenda item is student reports. We have 2 reps here. We have Suzanne Finnerty and Tyler Schuster. Does someone want to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, thanks.
So this season for our fall sports at Fairfield Ward High School has been a great season. Our girls soccer team is the FCI co-champions and the state champion runner-ups. We have our Thanksgiving football game versus Ludlow at 10 o'clock at our school at Fairfield Ward. Our first quarter report cards were distributed on November 10th, and we started the second quarter. We had a sports entertainment and broadcast class visit the NBC TV studio in Stamford to get a chance to see how what goes into producing a TV show, and they were very excited about that. We are finishing up our college admission visits, in which we've had about 200 colleges visit the school to present information about their school. They're from all across the country. The most surprising one is St. Andrews from Scotland visited our school. And this was mainly for juniors and seniors, which we had 4-year, 2-year technical career schools visiting our school, and 95% of the representatives that were there are the representatives that will actually be reading the student applications. We have the alumni return day tomorrow, in which prior students from Fairfield Ward who are currently in college will present and give a opportunity for students to ask questions and really get insight on what college life is like. We have a lot of different activities that have went on. We had No Shave November, in which we had 40 participants and raised $200 for charity. Our choir students are performing at the annual tree lighting at Town Hall, which will be on the 5th. And our drama club performed 3 showings of Pride and Prejudice, in which all 3 shows were sold out. We have our annual Carillon show coming up, and that'll be held on the 18th, in which the students are preparing for and having their practices now. And our annual 9th grade forum on underage drinking was a very big success. This was for the students and parents to attend, and we had 72% attendance, which is the highest we've seen in a while. So that was a great success. And other than that, just a lot to look forward to for the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Finnerty?
Oh, sorry. So I guess I saw Max walk in while we were discussing bylaws, and I think he thought that the meeting had already started and unfortunately went home. Either that or he had a lot of homework. But so I have my portion, and I assume that he'll give his at the next meeting. So at the end of the season, Ludlow couldn't be prouder of our fall athletes. All of our teams had successful seasons this year, some even boasting winning records, semi-finalist positions, or FCAC championships. All students, administration, and staff are extremely proud of our boys soccer team, who, if you didn't already know, won FCACs. In the champion game, senior captain Lauren Toby scored a late goal against Greenwich and lifted the team to a victory and an FCAC championship. The team and Coach O'Hara are positive that this success will propel the program into next season, hopefully one as successful as this one. In girls swimming, freshman Sarah Grinold crushed the 50-meter freestyle and emerged from the pool as a state champion, a rare feat for a freshman. The girls volleyball team as well had a very successful season and were semi-finalists in both the FCAC and state tournaments. More recently, November 17th was signing day for Ludlow's Division I athletes. Parents, friends, and other Division II and Division III committed athletes watched as their Division I teammates signed their letters of intent to play for their respective schools. To end the fall season on Thanksgiving, Ludlow plays Ward at Ward for the town crown. After talking to some football players, they seem pretty confident in a victory and expect huge support as they take on the Mustangs on Thursday. And again, college. By now, all students have turned in their early decision and early action applications. For early decision, students should hear back by December 15th, and early action should hear back shortly after that, if they have not already. Most of the regular decision deadlines are January 1st or January 15th. Like always, students are working hard, getting together the necessary paperwork for applications, visiting schools, and narrowing down lists, all while keeping up their grades. Like Tyler mentioned, marking period 1 ended October 31st, thank God, and removed some of the stress off of students. That being said, senioritis is expected to make its annual appearance soon, hopefully after Thanksgiving break. However, there have been reports of isolated incidents among some students. All in all, Ludlow students continue to push through and are extremely excited for the upcoming Thanksgiving break and winter sports seasons.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone on the board have any questions for our student reps? Mr. Fattabine?
I guess I have a quick sort of question. You gave a lot of sort of facts and activities that are occurring and things. I just want to maybe, if either of you two want to comment on a more general subjective issue as far as, whether, students in general, how they feel as far as the courses, the load, what they're sort of discussing. Get a flavor for the board of, what's going on as a, what you feel is happening with the students and whether they're concerned excessively about college, whether they're any more normally concerned, or is it normal concern, or they feel like they're are getting the courses they need for the college. Are they not? Do they, just a general impression of what you may be hearing around the school, just to give the board a flavor as to, and more objectively, what's sort of happening.
So from what I've heard and spoken among my friends and other peers, it really all depends on the student. Some students are taking all APs, while some are taking regular, just the regular 42 classes. Everybody feels that they got more than enough opportunity to do what they wanted and to take the courses they wanted. Obviously, everybody is very nervous to hear back from colleges. I know my first deadline is January 1st because I didn't have early action. So it does get very nerve-wracking, but it's nothing out of the usual. And the guidance counselors at the school, along with the teachers, are very supportive of the senior class and submitting their applications.
Thank you.
I agree. Everyone always says that junior year is the worst year because of the course load, and that's the one that colleges look at the most, but I think first semester senior year is the worst. I gave myself, and I know a lot of my friends did too, a very heavy course load, and I found it difficult as well as many of my friends and a lot of other students to manage applying to college, getting everything done, studying for your last chance at the SATs or ACTs, and also keeping up your grades. I think that maybe a little bit more preparing could have been done or been encouraged over the summer. For example, we wrote our college essays in English this year. Some of us did, and I think that could have been done at the end of last year or suggested or started planning for things like that. So I think at the end of junior year, it'd be very helpful if we started looking forward to college and encouraging students to get some of the preparing and some of the work done before their senior year starts.
I thank you for that insight.
Okay, well, I think that's it, so thank you very much, and as always, you're free to leave and go get ready for Thanksgiving, so thank you. Okay, the next item is public comment and petition. So any members of the public who wish to make a comment on a non-voting item, please come forward. I'm assuming, looks like nobody is coming up for non-voting item public comment. Okay, so we will move on to the next item, old business, second reading of policy 5516, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management policy. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve Policy 5516, Students with Healthcare Needs, Life-Threatening Allergies, and Glycogen Storage Disease Management Policy. And Mrs. Maxon Cannelli moves. We have a second. Mr. Patton. Okay, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, do you have any additional, I know we spoke about this, but if you have additional comments before we want to open it up to the board, or would you rather get comments from the board?
I think I'd like to open it up to the board. Obviously, they received some new text, so before I go into any further, the rationale behind some of that, I'd like to hear from the board in terms of their reactions to any of that, any of the changes, rationale behind the changes. I'd appreciate feedback.
Okay, Mr. Fattabine.
I guess I just need a clarification as to what actual draft of the policy is before the board right now. We had in our packet enclosure number 1, I believe, which appears to be the language that occurred or was presented at the last board meeting. And then we have in our Friday folder, we received a memo from yourself as chair of the policy committee, dated November 20, indicating that there were some changes to the prior draft policy presented, and there were some additional changes. So I guess I want a clarification as to whether or not it's these changes attached to your memo of what was that? November 20th. That's before the board now.
So yes, in response to comments from board members, from members of the public, from parents, and most especially from staff, we asked in policy to take another look at the content of the policy, which had already come for that first reading, and the result of that feedback and that work is the language that is in blue, so that we replaced the enclosure with the information that was in that Friday packet accompanied by my memo.
I guess my comment is that while I'm happy, and I think the board certainly discussed these proposed changes to the prior policy, I sort of believe that these are sort of substantive changes, and therefore I would propose and suggest that it's not necessarily a voting item because there are substantive changes, and this be, again, the first read of this amended policy, and that you have the actual voting of it next meeting. I guess I can put that in the form of a motion, or whether...
Yeah, would you like to make a motion?
Or I think it's, I think, in general, it's been our practice, I thought, that if there's a substantive change, that the policy will hold over, it would be a first read when there's a substantive change, and then it would hold over to the next meeting for a voting item. Since this is a substantive change, I don't know if a motion, I guess I can make it a motion, but it's a general policy, I thought, that when there's a substantive change, which I believe this is, and maybe you can rule on whether it is or isn't, that it's held over. But I can move that since there's a substantive change to the proposed policy, that this will be considered a first read, and that it will be voted on, absent any other changes, at the next board meeting, or next regular board meeting.
So do you just wish to make a motion to postpone to the next regular meeting?
We could do it as simply as that. Motion to
That
postpone
would be
to the next
nice,
regular
yeah.
meeting.
Okay, so Mr. Fattabine is making a motion to postpone a vote. Mr. Dwyer seconds. Okay, any comments on that? Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, Mr. Patton.
I would have two requests if the will of the board is to postpone it. Obviously, a second reading is not something I need to do since I have read it and reread it, and I'll say reread it a few other times. So I really don't have a strong opinion about that. I'm ready to move on this now, but I'm in a different position, obviously, than anyone else here, and I don't have my two other policy members anyway. What I would ask, if postponing, would that then preclude any discussion and also any comment from the public? And would it be possible to have some discussion, because obviously there's an awful lot here which we are seeing for a second time, and that if there were issues with any of that, I would appreciate knowing. And then secondly, I believe there are a good number of people here who did not speak during public comment because they were indicated that they should only be coming up for non-voting items. This was supposed to be a voting item at which they expected to be able to comment, and I would appreciate their having the opportunity to do so.
Do you want to address that? Because Mr.
Yeah,
Patton's...
I'll address that real
Okay.
quick. Mrs. Maxon Cannella makes a very good point, and I would propose that I withdraw my motion for now, let public comment occur as well as board discussion, and then with my intent being to reintroduce that postponement after we hear those comments.
Okay, so you'll withdraw the motion for now, Mr. Okay, so then we're going to have discussion. Mr. Patton, followed by Mr. Llewellyn.
I don't know if this is a point of order or not. That's why I miss Jeff Steele from my RTM days. He always seemed to have the appropriate Robert's Rules answer. But, so I understand that normal board procedure, it's not a bylaw or anything, is that we have a first read 1 month and then the next month we vote on the item. But how do we get substantive changes if the item was not on the agenda before? Or are you saying that substantive changes are from what we first got? You're saying substantive changes from the first read last month? Yeah. But the item doesn't actually get on the agenda till now. So if we already had the changes and we already had time to look at them, how are they substantive to change? In other words, if I was going to make an amendment and it was on the floor now, which I guess technically it is, and the amendment was substantive, then I can see pushing it off. But the changes in the document as we got in our packets on Friday, the motion is the motion, the document is the document. So again, it's more of a point of order, not or clarification than anything. Anybody?
Okay, Mr. Dwyer, you wish to discuss that?
The Robert's Rules provides that this item is not before us until there's an official motion. So while it was a first read, my guidance to the chair of the policy committee was that if the committee wanted to make some changes as a result of conversation and then bring that forward, and the committee wished to have it considered and acted on this meeting, I would be okay with that, because at this meeting, any member who feels as though that is too much of a change and we ought to postpone it to the next meeting is free to do that, and then the board can act as to whether they want to act on it tonight or postpone it. So I think it's on the agenda appropriately, and I think it's appropriate for Mr. Fattabine to say, no, the changes are too much, I'd like more time.
Your explanation is rational, and I accept.
Okay, Mr. Llewellyn.
I'm not sure about the rest of the board members, but I actually didn't receive the changes in my packet. I only received the original, so I haven't seen before the red line. I just received the old language. It was not my Friday packet. This is what was in it, and it's stamped for today's date. Anyway, I think in terms of the language that's set forth in front of us on prevention, which I think is the new language at hand here, I understand that the district will make best efforts to recognize, and I think, you know, that's a valid comment. The district cannot guarantee, you know, that also I think makes sense. Where I have a problem with this language is this little catch-all at the bottom, notwithstanding the above. It shall not be the responsibility of the faculty or staff or any elementary school to read student-provided food labels or ascertain whether or not student-provided food items contain tree nuts and peanuts. No, I had printed this out before I came. It is the obligation of each parent to determine the content of the food items that they are provided and they're provided to their child. I think the issue I have with that is the parents aren't in school. The parents are, some are more attuned to what's going on every day, and some are less attuned based on, you know, different factors. But for that one parent who happens to miss what this policy is because they didn't happen to read their manual this year, you know, I'm not sure that that is fair to the children with allergies. If we continue on to the back of what I printed out, we have in here the EpiPen information. You know, we have 2 cases of EpiPens being used in, I guess this is the current school year. It's 14-15. You know, that's 2 more than we had security risks this year. Yet we have security where we need to show our license, you know, give our social security numbers, you know, leave DNA, whatever it is, over at the high schools now, that has not become before this board for any approval, question, funding. But I digress. But if we look here, I might be able to support it if the teachers will make the best efforts to read the student-provided, and is also the obligation of each parent. But I don't think that we can allow a group of kindergartners or first graders to enter into an environment where we're relying on 30 different parents to supervise what could potentially send a child into anaphylactic shock or even worse. So I can't support it where it has no teeth. We might as well just not have a policy if there is not going to be oversight.
Mr. Patton?
This may shock Mr. Llewellyn, but I 100% agree with him.
Thank you. That's twice now.
I won't make it a habit. No, kidding. On that note, after discussions with many parents, Ms. Kennelly and I have, I guess, come to a mutual agreement on amendments that we would like to propose to that language very specifically. And I guess let me hand this out. Okay, so in a nutshell, I understand the need to add.
I'm sorry, so this is your motion?
So this is the motion
Okay.
here. Should I read the motion in full?
Yes, if you could, please.
Okay. So the motion is in section 5, prevention, C, subsection 2. The aforementioned final two sentences of that paragraph that begin with "notwithstanding the above" and end with "they provide to their child." To remove those two sentences and to replace them with the following language. So it would read, "Faculty and staff shall use their best efforts to ensure that no food items containing tree nuts and peanuts are present in the elementary classrooms. The district, in partnership with school staff, shall counsel all parents against providing children with food items containing tree nuts and peanuts to consume as classroom snacks. All parents share in the responsibility of keeping children safe in the classroom by complying with this policy." And then a final paragraph, one sentence would be, "The district shall indemnify and hold harmless any faculty or staff member from any claim for personal injuries in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 10-235.
Okay, so that is your motion. Do you have a second? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly? Okay, do you wish to go into more detail, or do you want to have the...
Sure.
Discuss it?
Sure. Just quickly. Again, into what Mr. Llewellyn said. The point is not to create a policy or part of a policy that is ineffective. We don't want to have kindergartners and parents of kindergartners worrying about that they have to monitor themselves, and everybody has to worry about what the other 20 kids and parents in that classroom are or are not doing in terms of complying with the policy. Certainly, nobody wants administration, staff, or teachers to be held liable for any accidental happenstance that may happen. I mean, things happen in classrooms, especially when the kids are younger. It's a sad fact of life and being a teacher or administrator in a classroom of many kids and many activities that go on all at once. So that's why, again, we put the sentence in at the bottom, which refers to the state statute. Normally you wouldn't put that in a policy, but we wanted to kind of reiterate that we feel that we're not going to hold anybody to you know, to a horrible situation that may or may not happen.
Okay, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Two primary reasons why I would support this amendment, and just so the board is wondering, in case the board is wondering why the policy chair is weighing in with an amendment for a policy that I've seen for 9 months or so. This wording specifically came out of last Monday's meeting. It wasn't something that we had exactly prepared for. We discussed, and I'm not going to speak for the other two policy committee members. I was not happy with it at that time, but we did want, the policy was before the board, and we did want to move on it. I did understand the rationale behind the language. This is a policy that involves protecting children's lives. Of course, that is something that is a little bit frightening for staff in terms of as a responsibility. It would be frightening for anyone, never mind the parents whose children with life-threatening allergies they have to send off to school every day and trust that those children will be looked after and their health care needs attended to ensure their equal access to our education. But that said, again, I completely understand that once education has truly taken place, and that is going to take years of training of our staff, training of our new staff, looking at substitutes, the education of parents, because the misconceptions regarding allergies and allergic reactions are rife in the community, and there's a huge educational component to that. And so I absolutely understand the trepidations of faculty and staff regarding what their responsibility is or is not. That said, my support of this amendment comes primarily from two areas. One is the fact that our policy language should be consistent. And I'll give you a few other policies where we have language nothing like what was proposed in that Friday packet in terms of what teachers do not need to do. We have a substance abuse policy, 5313, which talks about school personnel shall observe and report inappropriate behavior. That is a very active position expected of our staff. Any teacher or school staff member who suspects a student is demonstrating symptoms of possible drug and alcohol use shall immediately refer that student. That is an active role by the teacher. They must observe the student changes and evaluate them. We have a bullying policy, 5330, which has language including requires personnel who witness certain behaviors to notify and report. Again, an expectation of staff involvement and active engagement in a safe school environment. That the norms established by adults through consistent enforcement of policies. Again, active role of the staff. That there must be adequate adult supervision. Again, active language. We have policy 5517 on the reporting of child abuse and neglect. All professional and paraprofessional school employees are recognized as mandated reporters in order to protect children. Policy 5518 on suicide prevention. There is reference to expectation of school staff to actively respond to a situation where a child is at risk. All of these involve an expectation of an active faculty. So to suddenly have a policy where we start stipulating that teachers do not have a responsibility, one, is not consistent with anything else in our policy manual, and two, while I don't disagree with the idea of teachers not reading labels and what that would involve as a time and as a safety and as their own concern about their responsibility, we do still have the district-wide multidisciplinary team, which absolutely could take up that exact notion and support and produce administrative regulations which will result in that exact same notion. It's simply not the place in our policy to say what teachers should not be doing. If it's not consistent with suicide prevention, child abuse, bullying, I don't see its place in this policy. And my second reason, so one, policy language should be consistent. Secondly, teachers do have a legal obligation in this regard. And to tell them that they have no obligation to read, which again, I don't have a problem with, just not in policy, but to tell them that they have no obligation to ascertain anything is giving them the false sense of security, which we've been reading about in letters from the public for months. We talk about not wanting families and children to have a false sense of security. Well, teachers can't have that false sense either. That would be misleading to them. Yes, the district carries liability in this, but teachers can as well. and we're going to educate them and train them and provide protections in place, which are elsewhere in this policy, to ensure the safety of these children. But that is why I support this amendment.
Mr. Dwyer?
Actually, I think we all support this concept. I think every teacher here, whether we write a policy or not, is concerned about the safety of the children in their charge.
Completely agree.
Okay? I think what we're struggling with is what is the proper language to express that without putting more liability on the backs of our teachers. And I'm not really comfortable with a process that says at a board meeting, a language that is supposed to show that we are concerned about the safety of children and yet protecting our staff. That sounds to me like that's a legal question that really the town attorney or somebody ought to say, okay, if you don't like that language, let me write some other language that gets to the point but protects our staff. So I am in support of Mr. Fatterbean's motion to postpone, simply to give the town attorney or the school attorney or somebody a chance to look at this and say, how do I fashion something that is acceptable to solve both issues? So I personally would like to go to the public now and listen to their comments, and then if Mr. Fatterbean still has an interest in putting forth a motion, I'd support it.
Okay, Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Mr. Patton, since you brought this forward, can you tell us a little more on Connecticut General Statute 10-235 that you reference? Or can anyone else? I mean, what does that cover? And what's the language around that? Oh,
I'm going to defer to Mrs. Cannelli on that.
And I was going to bring the book, and I apologize for not having that with me, but what it references that...
essence is fine.
Yeah, the essence of it is, and Mr. Fatterbean can correct me if I'm not capturing the essence, the essence of it is that if there's a situation of personal injury, that the teacher is not held personally liable for that, unless it crosses the line, and there are 3 adjectives, I can only remember 2 of them, into wanton or reckless negligence. But the idea being that if a teacher has made a best faith effort, this is my understanding of it, if they have made a best faith effort, that they are not held liable. That is not to say that the district isn't, but that teacher is not personally held liable, and they would truly have to cross an egregious line to be held personally accountable, and that's the essence of it.
Thank you. So and that is a state statute, so board policy cannot trump state statute. Therefore, I don't think, I mean, I can support the top paragraph. I'm not sure why we need the bottom paragraph if that is, an inalienable right under state statute. I think that the top part definitely does work, but I'm not sure the bottom part is necessary. I think it's redundant. I think this board has removed things that they thought were redundant in the past relating to statutes and the like. So I think that this language is superfluous and can support it without that language.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just to explain, I will say that part of that was compromise. And just, I completely agree with you. They are indemnified. That's across the board, across all of our policies. We can't trump that. This was put in, part of the idea behind the whole rationale of the document is that it is also an education piece. It is our piece to the public, letting them know about responsibilities, letting them know of many of the factors involved in this. And so I did support the inclusion of that language, both as a nod to the teachers that we understand that they make a best faith effort, but they are in fact indemnified. And I didn't want to discount their concerns, because I think they are entirely legitimate and understandable, and that's why I support it, redundant though it might be.
And for a couple different things. One is, please know that they both actually agree with me tonight, which has never happened before, at the same meeting, especially on the same topic. But I think, there probably isn't a single teacher in the district who doesn't do this now when they know there's a child there. So I think it's something that they probably all already do. My issue with it is just the fact that it's the redundant language of the policy, which I know is something that you in the past have always felt very strong about.
I guess I just want to step in for a second. I have a couple of questions. First, Mrs. Maxim-Cannelli just brought up when you said the teachers would not be liable, but the district would be. I mean, has a lawyer, like the town attorney or the board lawyer, looked at this to give any feedback? I'm just asking, I don't know. And then I guess my first question, I probably should have asked this one first, is what was it that resulted in this sentence, this change? Where did that come from?
Which change?
The change that we got in our, or some of us got in our Friday packet, the notwithstanding the above sentence. Where did that language come from? Who created that language? Why was that language created? And so, I mean, because it is a dramatic change from the original draft policy that we received. So I just wanted to get a sense of why these changes were made in the first place from what we had in our first read to what we have now.
Everything else in this that is in blue, that was changed from the first reading back in October, was a result of input from the public and from the policy committee. That specific sentence did not come from the policy committee, it came from central office, and I don't know if Dr. Parks would like to speak to that or not, but...
Yep. Mrs. Parks?
Yes, I would like very much to speak to that. At the policy committee, I was specifically asked to find language, and this whole paragraph under number 2 was crafted by our attorneys, not by the committee, not by central office. It all came out of Durant Nichols' office for us to use in the policy.
Thank you. Mr. Fattabine?
This is a danger, we shouldn't discuss attorney, discussions in open public, I think, but, and to the extent that, I won't go there. I won't.
Okay, any...
Public dollars
Mr. Fattabine?
Well, no, we don't go there. But anyway, I have another questions. I have some additional questions, though. This proposed policy only relates to peanuts and tree nuts, whereas my understanding, the prior policy laid more broadly to all allergens.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason why it's limited to peanuts and tree nuts, and why, I guess maybe explain why the decision
Sure.
was made to limit it to only one particular allergen?
There's a reason the policy committee did not try to produce a safe snack list. We attempted in one meeting to do so. We got some valuable feedback on that attempt. We dropped that attempt. We then tried to make it an issue for the district-wide team, recognizing that the state guidelines do hold out as an option to be considered by districts the idea of creating allergen-free classrooms. And so in that previous draft, while we knew that the three of us were not qualified to do so, we wanted to charge a district team with producing such a list. While we were getting the feedback on that notion, I was finally able to get from Mrs. Parks the numbers regarding the peanut and tree nut allergies in our classroom, which were on the chart that you received in that Friday packet. And that was extremely compelling to the committee, that if you look first at the number of, first column being the number of students with food allergies, period. The second column being those students with EpiPens, which is an indication of a life-threatening allergy. And then how many of those orders for EpiPens involve peanut and tree nut allergies. Just to be clear in terms of the public, that is not to say that those children do not have additional allergies, but those were pretty impressive numbers in terms of creating a sense of urgency around that allergy in particular, in addition to the idea that this is an allergy that children generally do not outgrow, that this is one of the ones associated most with anaphylactic shock, that this posed a real danger, and that this gave the committee, because, again, staff, public, et cetera, were really having a hard time with the notion of the safe school snack list, which I completely understand, since for months we couldn't do it either. And so we keyed in, we focused in on peanuts and tree nuts because of and I'll use the phrase clear and present danger, posed by them in our classrooms as evidenced by the data before you. And so that while, just to be clear, this is not to ignore the needs of students with other life-threatening food allergies. And that we have the 504 language in there, that if between the hand washing and surface washing protocols and any other additional, I told you that it was going to come up, and any other additional safety protocols within the classroom, if a student with a different type of life-threatening allergy needs additional safeguards, they could pursue the 504 process. But at the very least, we average more, at least 1.5 peanut tree nut allergic children in each elementary school classroom. It only made sense that it was time to remove them from the classroom.
All right, can I ask a follow-up question with respect to this chart? The table, I guess I'd call it a table. The first column you mentioned, students with food allergies. The total pre-K to 5 is 414 in this chart. And if I understand the chart, it says orders for nut allergies, which I assume are the number of children that have nut allergies, because they're ordering.
And have an EpiPen for that, meaning that a doctor has designated it life-threatening.
All right. 258. Mean the difference, I would assume, have other than nut allergies. So you have a substantial portion of the population, maybe not a majority of the population, but a substantial portion of the population that have allergies other than nut allergies, I would assume. Is that accurate?
Right.
7% or more.
Well, you have 414 with allergies, food allergies, 258 of which are nut allergies. So if you do the percentage, it's pretty close to a little less than 50%, 40%, I don't know, I should be better at math.
No. So 258 out of the 277 life-threatening allergies are peanut
Life-threatening.
treated. Yes.
All right, so that's the difference. So the food allergies, not all of which are considered life-threatening. I got
Correct.
it. So you have, all right, I understand that. So we're only really concerned with life-threatening allergies, is what you're sort of implying.
Those would be the ones that the state statute is mandating us to make this policy change to address.
Okay, I misunderstood that, I apologize.
That's what I'm here for.
I thank you for that.
Okay, any other members of the board? Mr. Llewellyn?
A quick question. You mentioned the 504, and I was reading that here as well. In the 504, I lost my page here, page 5, the 504 says, the team responsible for the IHCP, Individual Health Plan, I guess, whatever that is, shall refer the student under 504 IDA. Is that the only way for that 504 referral, or can parents request that as well?
Parents can request an evaluation
Yes.
for a 504.
Parents can self-refer.
For a life-threatening, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mr. Patton?
I don't know, through the chair to anybody who's familiar with the policy, with the giant phone book that is the policy manual. In reference to Mr. Llewellyn's question on redundancy, I'm always, again, agreeing with you, that, redundancy is, if it's not needed, it's not needed. Do we have other policies that specifically reference state statutes?
Go ahead.
Generally, what you do is you list the reference to the statute at the bottom of the policy.
Like a footnote?
Right, you'll see at the bottom of a lot of policies, there's references
That's
there.
right here.
This one probably has it.
Yeah.
Right. So you could simply amend, you could simply add that to the list at the bottom of it. But that's generally how you handle it. In other words, it goes at the bottom as a reference, as opposed to going into the policy.
Okay, and so according to our handy footnote
Look,
list
of
here.
all the issues about this policy, that sentence is the least of the problems,
Okay.
okay?
Okay, any other members of the board wish to comment?
Just
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli?
Just asking if there is anything else in here, any other of the stipulations.
But right now, we're speaking to the amendment.
You're right,
Which
sorry.
is Mr. Patton's amendment. So are there any other board questions on this amendment? Okay, we're going to go to the public on the amendment. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fattabine, did you?
Well, I guess my question, I would certainly like to see and understand if there is any attorney information relating to this subject matter. I'd certainly like to see and understand what that is before I decide. I would also, and I don't know whether this is going to go forward or not, but you may want to think about, the amendment indicates for personal injuries. If this is the amendment the body wants, they may want to consider maybe from any claim of liability. I'm not sure, you have to look at the statute as well, but personal injuries is a little more specific than general liability. But,
Mrs. Maxon, oh, sorry.
that's just, I don't know what, since this is a first read, I just raised that as an issue.
Right.
I
This
don't
is
know what
wording
that's-
from the statute.
All right.
Okay, any other, Mr. Patton?
I guess through the chair to Dr. Title, your comment before to my other comment led me to believe you had some concerns that about this taking out the paragraph, the part of the paragraph, and adding this language. Can you speak to that?
No, it's just, there's huge substantive questions on this policy that deal with the safety of children and the responsibility of teachers that's been back and forth for months, and it just seems inefficient for you to spend time arguing about whether this sentence belongs in the policy or not. I'm just trying to advance the conversation.
Okay.
And move it along, that's all.
You
If
seem
it's
to be
in
worried.
or not
okay.
in, to me, is irrelevant.
But we're talking about an amendment here. We're not talking about
Yep.
the whole policy yet.
I know, I'm talking about that last sentence
But
that you
we're-
questioned.
But we're discussing just this amendment, not the whole policy.
I
right?
understand.
Okay.
But his comment was that as he just said, was that's the least troubling of the concerns, which led me to believe, like, are there other concerns?
Well, we heard concerns.
Right.
That's why the policy was amended by the policy committee.
So okay, you're just going general.
That was a general statement that of all the heavy stuff that's in this policy, to be spending time arguing about whether you should have the sentence in there that restates the law, to me is an inefficient use of the board's time, given that we have other agenda items to cover. That was my only comment.
Understood.
Okay.
Point of order question.
Can I follow up on that? But I thought Mr. Patton was actually asking whether the change to that language is something that you're comfortable, the first paragraph, as opposed to just the second. I thought that's where you were going. Were you or not?
Correct.
Yes, I would like.
I thought he answered.
My feeling is that our attorney gave us language that we put in the policy. If we'd like the attorney to review substitute language to ensure that the board's liability is protected, then that may be a good move, because I don't believe the board's attorney has looked at this particular language. So the issue is not whether or not faculty or staff are held harmless. The real issue is the district protected? And maybe there's a way to meld the two. And I'm not objecting, necessarily. Maybe there is a way to make it more active without causing any liability. I mean, there's probably a place to do this, or the board can vote this in, we'll check it with our attorney, and if he says we need to tweak it, we'll bring it back as an amendment. But I think that, I think people are expecting us to sort of move ahead on this, and right now we have no policy. Well, we have a very limited policy, and I think the committee's done a great work on this, and I think that they've captured, the essence of the issues, and like to see it move ahead, but if people think it needs to be postponed for either Mr. Fatterbean's reasons or for legal review, I can understand that completely.
That was going to be my next question, is in light of, what we're anticipating, Mr. Fatterbean's future motion for postponement, if hypothetically we, through the chair too, I guess, again, Dr. Title, if we amend this policy as proposed.
Right.
But then there's a motion to postpone, so it goes back to the policy committee.
No, it doesn't have to go back to the
It
policy.
doesn't have to go back to the policy.
No.
It just comes back as a full thing as we've amended it tonight.
Right, we could have an attorney review it in between. Was that your
Okay,
point?
and then so that then there wouldn't be substantive changes, we could just.
Well, I don't know.
Well,
A substantive is in the eye of the beholder.
is, right. And on the same point, if we vote on it tonight,
Yes.
if, again, hypothetically, this amendment passes, the motion is before us,
And you vote on the whole policy.
we would, if the legal team just decides that, we no, that's really not great, we need to tweak it a bit, we can still bring it back as an
Two
as
more
an
readings.
adjustment. 2 more meetings, but at least at that point, we would have a policy in place.
Yep. You do it either way. Procedurally.
Do you have a recommendation in terms of, would you rather see the policy in place sooner?
I think that's a board decision.
Okay.
Mr. Fattabine?
I'm going to make a motion to postpone the amendment. Postpone the motion to amend until the next meeting, when we can have maybe some better insight as to what the statutory language is, what the...
I'm sorry, could you just make it a
what-
brief
all right,
motion?
so I can make a brief motion. I make a motion, we have postpone the motion to amend until the next regular meeting.
Okay. Is that possible?
Second to
Well, no,
Mr.
but
Is
Roy.
that possible?
Do we need to vote on the original amendment?
Postpone a motion, you can't postpone a motion to amend.
I'm sorry, I'm not speaking. I've never, ever heard that in any meeting ever, that you can postpone a motion for an amendment. You can ask the amendment to be withdrawn, you can do a million one things, but you can vote it down, but you can't postpone a motion to, yeah.
I would ask whether or not the proposer wants to withdraw the motion, then.
I do not want to withdraw the motion. I would be willing to make a friendly amendment to take out that final line, but I do not wish to withdraw the amendment.
Okay.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to withdraw the final line.
I don't believe that can be a friendly amendment. That's, I mean, because my understanding, with my limited Robert Rules understanding, is that friendly amendments would be grammar, they'd be spelling, they'd be word insertion here or there.
A couple word deletion.
It's more than a couple. But that's not for me to make the ruling, Madam Chair.
I was going to say, we've discussed this as redundancy, so, and again, I don't want to really waste any more time on that. So if that's where the board seems to want to go on that little piece, to move forward, to vote on the amendment, or to turn it down, then I'm fine with it.
So he's making a friendly amendment. Is everyone okay with that friendly amendment?
I'm fine.
Is everyone okay with that? Because if one person isn't, we can't do it. Mr. Fattabine? Okay, so the friendly amendment to withdraw the final line of the proposed amendment has taken place. So we will go to the public for comment on the amendment. And the amendment before us right now is to remove language from section VC2, to remove the final 2 sentences beginning with notwithstanding, and insert language in the same place. Faculty and staff shall use their best efforts to ensure that no food items containing tree nuts and peanuts are present in elementary classrooms. The district, in partnership with school staff, shall counsel all parents against providing children with food items containing tree nuts and peanuts to consume as classroom snacks. All parents share in the responsibility of keeping children safe in the classroom by complying with this policy. And that is now the new end, because we have the friendly amendment that withdrew that last sentence. So that is the amendment before us. Is there any public comment on the amendment? Just as a reminder, we have 2 minutes per person for public comment.
Yes, Bob Smoller, I'm the president of the FEA, and just to provide some context, I was at the policy committee meeting, and one of the reasons I understood that the existing language about not going into reading labels and ascertaining agreements is that there's actually going to be a multidisciplinary committee who's going to be charged with figuring out how to operationalize this policy. And it was my understanding the reason that language was in there was to give guidance to that committee as to what their parameters were. And the parameter was that we can come up with a way to operationalize that, but it should not include teachers reading labels or having to figure out what the ingredients of baked goods are. And that's my main concern, is teachers are not equipped to be able to identify the ingredients or interpret labels in many instances. I'm sure some of you have read labels. They have all kinds of crazy ingredients on it. You can't tell if it's got nuts in it or it doesn't have nuts in it, or if it was created in a factory that has nuts or doesn't have nuts. I mean, it's an impossible task for teachers to do. They're not nutritionists. They don't know the language. And so I have grave concerns about any portion of this policy that will require teachers to try to ascertain the ingredients of any kind of a snack, and that would be my main objection to this amendment. I don't understand what best efforts mean. Best efforts to do what? I understand that Mrs. Maxim Kennelly referenced a lot of action language in other policies, but they had very specific things by which they were, teachers were actively involved to investigate. Here we're saying best efforts, but best efforts to do what? If it's best efforts to identify ingredients of snacks, that would be a huge problem for teachers, create liability, I think, for them, and also create a situation that it's a no-win for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Time. Any other public comment? Please come to the front and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Tricia Picco. I live at 114 Castle Avenue. I happen to be an 8th grade science teacher for Region 16. I did not know about this issue before I came here, but sitting here and listening, I can tell you that at the beginning of the year, I get a list of every student who has any kind of allergy, and we have a meeting about it. If they have a 504, which I am liable for, I have to follow that 504 of IEP. I myself had a genetic disorder. I'm not allowed to eat any protein whatsoever. Growing up in the school district, the school was notified of my severe allergy to protein. However, it was my responsibility and my parents' responsibility to make sure that I ate the foods that I was supposed to. I'm not saying that we have to leave this all on the parents. I'm just saying that you should go by the state statute that I as a teacher have to follow, because the wording sounds like it needs to be revisited. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment on the amendment?
Hi, Tricia Donovan, Fairfield resident. I can certainly understand the feelings of teachers and staff being a little overwhelmed. That is exactly how parents feel when they are diagnosed, their children are diagnosed with life-threatening food allergies. Most often the child is diagnosed, the doctor tells you what you should avoid, hands you an EpiPen, and sends you out the door. It is with much research and information that we go forward. And every day we read labels, not only on foods, but hair products, skin products. When you go to the dentist's office, you have to tell the dentist what you're allergic to. We are on constant state of vigilance everywhere we go, and it reorders your life and your thinking. The policy before the board today is comprehensive and will not, thankfully, leave teachers or staff holding a bag with no instructions. There are many provisions for education, awareness, and training, not just for staff, but all children and the broader parent community. No one should be managing this alone, most especially not a child, not a minor, who is in an atmosphere that they themselves cannot control with 20, 25 other children running around. The child in the room cannot be the adults in the room. They need the help of the teacher, and they have to enter into partnership with the parents, with the nurse, with the entire staff. And I really sincerely believe that this policy brings that partnership together, and that's the only way that we can move forward safely. And all the other safety policies that you have on your books, you create an atmosphere and a language of support. You create a community of support for students who have substance abuse problems, bullying issues, everything else. The language is extremely supportive, and this is the first time I've ever seen a safety issue become a waiver issue. And frankly, I'm kind of shocked. And in one of your policies, it says the adults should exhibit for the students the behavior of caring as a form of modeling for our students. Thank you.
Any other member of the public wish to speak?
Jessica Curran, also Fairfield resident. I have 2 children with food allergies, and prior to their diagnosis, I was not a nutritionist. I read food labels for certain things, but never for allergens. I learned. I have faith that our educators, our teachers, our staff can learn. Frankly, to hold the notion that we can't train our teachers to protect our students with life-threatening allergies in the classroom, but we are, as parents of children with life-threatening allergies, are supposed to trust that they can enact an emergency care plan and potentially save our children's lives. I can't wrap my head around that notion. To clarify for board members, this language does not say that teachers would need to read food labels to then feed the allergic children. It is to make sure that allergens such as peanuts and tree nuts are not in their classroom environment. So they are not at risk of reading a label, handing it to the child with the allergy, and hoping that they read that label correctly. They are trying to reduce the risk of accidental exposure, and that is a key responsibility that we as parents of kids with food allergies live with every day. They are the only adult in the room, and if that adult is not going to take that responsibility into their own hands, then our children cannot safely attend school and be in their classrooms.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, we'll go back to the board. I'm sorry.
I wasn't planning on speaking, but my daughter has...
Sir, if you could
I'm
give your
sorry, my
name.
name is Annie Credo. I'm a Fairfield resident. My daughter has a life-threatening peanut allergy. I had a bad experience when she was in preschool where I was working in Manhattan and I got a call, like a frantic phone call from her teacher. And she said, Annie, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, by accident, Emma had a cupcake. And I'm like, what do you mean? And my complete feeling of fear, unbelievable fear, overcame me. And I'm like, well, who made the cupcake? She's like, I don't know. And then quickly, a parent got on the phone and she's like, oh, Annie, I'm so sorry. I was the one that brought in the cupcakes. And I'm like, what happened? She's like, oh, Emma went to the bathroom and someone put it on her, where she was sitting, put the cupcake there. So Emma, who was 4 years old at the time, came to her table and actually ate the cupcake. And I can't, for anyone in the room that has a child with allergies, they would understand that fear. At that moment, I didn't know if there was peanuts in it. And I would assume most likely people don't put peanuts in a cupcake, so that made me feel a little better. But when I asked the parent, I said to her, can you tell me, did you make the cupcake? She said, no. And she's like, Annie, I got it from the bakery. I'm like, can you call the bakery? But just those feelings and like leaving, so I do support, and the woman that just spoke, I do support that the only adult in the room, I want you to tell you that story to realize that unbelievable fear that someone can, your child could actually die because they were given the wrong thing. So if you have an adult in the room that can actually read and look at a label and make sure that we can minimize the potential for our children to have a life-threatening allergy, anaphylaxis, where they have potential for death, I want that teacher to read. I want them to minimize the risk for my child, and I think they should be held accountable.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to speak to this amendment? Okay, seeing none, I'll come back to the board. Yes, Mr. Patton.
Through the chair to Ms. Maxon Kennelly, to my knowledge, there is not, but you're far more versed in this policy than I am. Is there any section in the policy, as is written, or this amendment for that matter, that says that teachers have to read labels of any kind?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Dwyer.
10 months, I think you've moved this policy all the way down to the 1-yard line. But the concern I have is that your committee met and said, let's put some language in there that tries to find a balance between the safety of children and the protection of our staff and the district from liability. And now 2 members of your committee are not here, and we're trying to rush through a statement that has not had the benefit of a lawyer looking at it and saying, okay, you didn't like what I originally wrote, so let me take another shot so that I might be able to solve the problem that the committee might have or that you might have. After 10 months, waiting until December 9th to to say at least we've had a chance for the attorney to look at it, rather than pass it and then hope the attorney doesn't come back with some other comment. We're talking about 12, 13 days here after 10 months. I don't see the rush to not allow an attorney to look at this and then come back, because quite frankly, I think the balance of the policy, I don't see anybody objecting to it. It's just this one sentence that is an important sentence, but one that deserves at least one final look by either the town attorney, the district attorney, both, that says we're the ones that have to defend the district and the town. At least let us look at it. So I hope that even the motion maker will support Mr. Fatabean's eventual motion to postpone, because I don't see the harm in at least getting one more look at that, rather than the board trying to write something that really is legal language.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
I was looking to put in a Tom Brady reference there, since you got us down to the 1-yard line, but
No, you're welcome.
well, he would score now, so I'll hold off on the Tom Brady analogy. As much as I would dearly love to move this amendment forward and move this policy forward, I have no wish to do so on a 4-3 vote. And my sense is that there are 3 members of the board right now who are very hesitant. I don't know where Mrs. Lou McCormick stands on this. Obviously, I know where the 3 of us on this side of the table are united in a front on this one. I don't have a problem with hesitate. I don't wish to push it, and I don't have Ms. Carnell or Mr. Convertito here to weigh in, and nor did they have a chance to weigh in on this specific language, since, as I said, the language that had appeared before us in policy, we hadn't been prepared for that either. My only question then is, administratively, do we vote on the amendment and then that's officially what we put before the attorney? And should the attorney come up with a different language or something objectionable about this, then we come back with that at the December meeting and offer an amendment to what is then the revised motion. Is that correct?
Sounds good to me, yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, obviously, but
Okay.
that seems like it would be rational. So we would vote on this. What this is, it was then what would go to the legal counsel if we choose to not approve the entire policy, but instead put it off until December 9th.
Okay.
So they would see what, either if this amendment passes or not, then if Mr. Fatabean's motion to postpone passes, then we would give whatever we have here tonight to him for his review, and then we would discuss it at the December 9th regular meeting. That would be my understanding. If anyone else on the board has a different opinion on it, I'm happy to hear it. Mr. Llewellyn.
My only comment was that I think we should vote on the proposed amendment and send that language back to council to review, rather than have them review the language they've already written that members of the board take issue with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if we should have a vote on this, and that since this is a different than what was given to the lawyer, then he should look at that. So that's fine. Any further comment from the board? Okay, so we are going to vote on the proposed amendment to policy 5515, moved by Mr. Patton, seconded by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
5516.
5516, sorry. To remove language from section VC2, final 2 sentences, starting with notwithstanding, and insert language in the same place. I've read it. Do I need to read it again? All the board has it. So, so that is the motion before us. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, it is, so how many do we have now? 6-1. Yes, and Mr. Dwyer is in opposition, so 6-4, 1 against. The motion passes 6-1. So now the motion before us is to the second read, the Board of Education approved policy 5516, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management policy as amended. Yes, Mr. Fatabean.
It's my time now,
Okay, there you go.
I will do a motion to postpone until the next regular board meeting.
Motion to postpone to the next regular board meeting, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Any discussion from the board? Yes, Mrs. Maxon Canali.
One very brief comment, only because I view every time I'm speaking at a microphone as an opportunity for education, and I want to clarify one point in response to public comment, that one very, very fundamental, and it is of vital importance that the public, the community, the schools, and parents understand the difference between eating and accidental ingestion and tactile contact, that the person in public comment who spoke about the protein allergy, that involves strictly ingestion, and understand that peanut, tree nut, as well as many other life-threatening food allergies, have a very dangerous component to them that have nothing to do with eating. This isn't about simply educating children to not eat food that wasn't given to them by a parent. This could be that they touch the hand, and this happened at the end of September to a Fairfield student. An allergic child touched the hand of a student who had eaten peanut butter and then wiped his own face and had to be transported to the hospital. So just please understand there's something very, very fundamentally different about the nature of some of these allergies, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Okay, so back to the amendment, which is to postpone to the next regular board meeting. Is there any board comment on that, on the motion to postpone? No? Okay. Oh, yes, Mrs. McCormick.
I just have one question, sorry, to ruin that moment in silence. What do we have in the meantime? What are we practicing in the district while we continue to defer?
In terms of what specifically?
How we're treating the nut allergies.
Right now, it varies. There are some students who have 504 plans, so they have procedural safeguards in place there. Other than that, part of the point of this policy was trying to get consistency across the district in this policy. So while right now, what we have as a policy is this single paragraph. Now, the administration has taken the role of having administrative regs that are more aggressive and robust, and those were not included, but everyone has access to them at home as well as online. But right now, there's a general policy, general administrative regs to address the management of food allergies in schools. But beyond that, it's on an individual basis. So I know that's kind of a vague question, but that's off the top of my head the best I can do.
Okay, any other board? Yes, Mr. Llewellyn.
I do have a question. So in terms of state statute, does 5516, the way it's written today, comply with the new rules?
The administrative regs do.
Does our policy?
No, and that's what the policy committee has been spending 10 months to get the board to have done what central office has already done through the regs.
Okay, so if we were to approve this tonight, would we be precluded from making an amendment or changing language starting next week?
The language to the policy?
Correct.
I think
Does it have
that
to go
means...
back to committee?
Yes.
It does. Okay. That's what I need to know.
Okay, any other board comment on the motion to postpone? Okay, anyone from the public wish to comment on the motion to postpone the vote on the allergy policy? See, oh, we go. Hi, please state your name and address
sure.
for the record. Thank you.
I'm Monique Sudakoff. I live at 472 Lockwood, and I have 2 kids in the public school system that have allergies. I found that the language that was revised was very helpful, and I really appreciate what the committee has done in making this policy. Allergies are extremely complex and extremely emotional, and you guys did a wonderful job reviewing this. I was extremely thankful that you rescinded the school safe snack policy. I did find what you sent on Friday a lot to digest. So I appreciate the motion to postpone. But I'm surprised that there hasn't been discussion tonight about the other parts of the policy, because I do think that there is a lot there that also needs to be discussed. And it's unclear to me when that discussion and when there would be opportunity for the public to comment on that. I don't know whether that would happen next month if you do postpone. But in particular, the motion to limit any food, or stop any food from being in the classroom for celebrations, I think is something that definitely deserves discussion. So my hope would be that if it's postponed, there's opportunity to discuss next month.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to speak to the to the motion to postpone? And I oh. Yeah. Yep.
Is this going to be the only option?
Well, if the motion
Sorry.
if the motion to postpone fails, we will then vote on this policy, and there will be opportunity for public comment. If this motion to postpone passes, we will then revisit the policy on December 9th, and there will be a voting item, so there will be opportunity for public comment on December 9th. So if it fails, you get to speak tonight to it. If the motion to postpone passes, the public will have the opportunity to speak to any issue within the policy on December 9th.
Okay.
So this is not the last opportunity for members of the public
Okay.
to address
Well,
this.
I guess with respect to the postponement, I just wanted to, I hope this isn't out of order, but I'm speaking sort of generally to the policy. I wanted to thank
I'm
the-
sorry, could you just say your name and
Sorry,
address for the
Kristen
record?
Darrington, Walben Court. I just did want to say that I appreciate very much the revised version, and even barring a postponement, I think the main things are that awareness is key, prevention is paramount, and inclusion is a priority. And I think removing the Safe School snack bridged a gap that many within the allergy community maybe didn't quite see eye to eye on. But I do feel that all of the other items in this policy moving forward, statutory language being an issue I won't comment on, are only going to help our community and these children. And I think that the children, these growing up these days, this is the new normal for them. I think that when they are given the chance to make their peers feel safe and included, this is second nature to them. I don't think that excluding in-school celebrations containing food, I think that's the direction that everyone is moving in, and I appreciate the efforts made. And I think that I would hope that when you meet next month that this is a unanimous decision, because I think it would signify to the community that this is something that is important and that should be embraced going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak to the postponement? Okay.
I wanted them to have a chance to talk.
Just a quick comment. If the policy is postponed, then we also postpone the new administrative regs that would support the policy. And I would love to, after watching the policy committee work on this for 10 months, if there's a possibility to come back on the legal language, we should do that if that needs to be done. But if we could get the district-wide committee started on creating those administrative regs, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, Tricia Donovan, Fairfield resident.
Okay. Any other members of the public wish to speak to the motion to postpone? Seeing none, back to the board. Any final comments? Mr. Llewellyn?
Through the chair to Dr. Title, is it possible to get the administrative regs going right off the bat, since it appears, other than this legal language, that the board is supporting this policy?
I don't know that it's really practical with the break and the board meeting coming up almost just like a week later. I don't see that it would really make a big difference. We could start getting in motion who might be involved in that, but really, until there's an official policy, it would be really not productive time for us. I don't think it will hurt just to wait till the board passes a policy. Then we'll get on the regs. And the other thing about this is this policy is so detailed now that it's almost regulation-like. We can put this into effect, get this right out as soon as the board votes on it, and this will have a substantial, regulation-type feel to it because it's so detailed. So I just, as a general practice, would like to, not assume the board's going to pass a policy until it's passed.
Mr. Patton?
Quick question. I think I already know the answer to this. But this policy, if approved, when it's approved, goes into effect immediately. It does not wait for like the next school year, calendar year, anything like that, correct?
Goes into effect immediately.
That's what I thought.
Obviously, there's a roll-up period where we
Right.
have to educate people and get it out and so forth, get it cleaned up and posted. But it doesn't wait for a specific like this, school year to start.
Right. Thank you.
If you wanted that to happen, then you would have written in the policy, effective such and such a
No,
date.
no.
Okay.
Any other board comment? I guess I would just say that I do support the motion to postpone, simply not because I have major issues. I think that the policy is very thorough, and the policy committee has done a tremendous amount of work. My only concern really is, well, it's twofold. First, I just feel that since what the policy committee voted on is not what we have before us, that I would really feel much better having all 3 members of the policy committee be sitting here at the table with us. I don't think it has to go back to policy, but on December 9th, if all 9 board members are here, I would just like to hear Mr. Convertito and Ms. Carnell weigh in on it. And then the other issue, too, I do feel it would be helpful, since the language has significantly changed from when the board lawyer looked or created the language, that I would like to have a lawyer look at this language. So those are my 2 concerns. That's why I will support the postponement. Mr. Llewellyn.
Can I ask a follow-up question on what you just said? Now that it's kind of with the body, can it go back to policy, or is it in play and can't go back to policy? Because I think if it can go back to policy, we should vote on it tonight. And the reason I say that is, last time it went back for a little last check, we came back with all sorts of changes that had not been contemplated earlier, and I'd like to avoid that again.
But I don't believe it went back to policy. We simply had a first
But,
read,
yeah, my
and the
apologies.
policy
At the last
committee
policy
took it
meeting,
upon
yes, you're
themselves
correct.
to make the changes.
Correct.
So the board itself did not make a motion to send it back to policy, and I'm not advocating for that. I just feel that having all 9 members of the board present, having the 2 other members of the policy committee have a chance to, at the board table, weigh in on these changes, and to have the board lawyer make some sort of comment or just suggestions as to if this language is fine. Those are my only 2 reservations, and that's why I support Mr. Fadabine's motion.
And my only question, though, is, does it go back to policy? Because last time, excuse me, I stand corrected, the administration made changes to it that added this, or suggested changes that were implemented here, as previously stated. So does it get the opportunity to go back again and potentially have other language, or is it locked down, subject to any comments from outside counsel? Dr. Teitel, do you know?
But wouldn't that be up to the policy committee, correct?
I think,
I'm sorry, Mr. Dwyer, then Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli.
Because in my mind, because it was not in the form of a motion before the board, I think the policy committee, if they chose, could further discuss it based on comments. It's before us as an official motion, so the board owns the policy now, I would say, because it is in the form of a motion. That would be my viewpoint.
I'll agree with you tonight, too, then. Thank you.
Okay. I
Okay.
want the minutes to record.
Okay, any other board comment on the motion to postpone? Okay, seeing none, we will take a vote. So the motion is to postpone the policy 5516, students with healthcare needs, life-threatening allergies, and glycogen storage disease management, to postpone to the next regular board meeting, which will be taking place on Tuesday, December 9th. All in favor, raise your hand. The motion is unanimous. Okay, 7-0. So the next item, new business, we have presentation of the recommended 2015-16 school calendar from Dr. Teitel. That's enclosure number 2.
Okay, thank you. This is not a voting item. It is an item that the board traditionally does vote on in December. And if there are going to be lots of amendments to this, then you should bring a sleeping bag. You may recall the last time we had this discussion about the student calendar, that the state had passed a law that basically said each region will create a school calendar, and each board would have to adopt that calendar within certain parameters. In the last legislative session, boards were given an extra year to comply with that, so that the calendar you're looking at now is within your purview. You are not beholden to the regional calendar. That will be the case in 16-17. I should point out that the board's current calendar, because I serve on the regional committee that drafts the regional calendar, and I kind of wanted to make sure this would happen. The board's current calendar going forward, if it were advanced to 16-17, would comply with the regional calendar. In other words, the board will not need to change its calendar to comply going forward. But on 15-16, you don't have to pay any attention to the regional calendar. This is essentially a calendar that is similar in its structure to the current school year and the previous school years. It does follow, the board has a policy on this, on school calendar, which is in there, and it also has administrative regulations that are attached. The only place this differs, and this is really more of just a tradition here, past practice, and nobody wants to change it, I just want to point it out, that in the regulations, it does say to avoid holding school on the optional state holidays, and Columbus Day is referenced in that parenthetical, and we have traditionally held school on Columbus Day. Other than that, this calendar comports with the regulations and with the policy. We've also attached the CES calendar because we want to the extent possible, align the vacations with CES for a variety of reasons that we went around the block on last year at some length. So that is the calendar. We have the latest possible start. Labor Day is September 7th, and therefore the first day for students is as late as it can be, which is on September 3rd, which is the traditional first day start. All the other holidays and other days are referenced as they always are, and we are continuing the practice of the February break with the early elementary release on the Thursday, and then the two-day long weekend in February, allowing the school year to end, in this case, with no snow days on June 16th. That builds 6 snow days into the school year. So it's pretty much a carbon copy of this year, and that is the one that we think works the best educationally, and I think that's all I really want to say about it. And the board can do what it wants at this point.
Okay, any comments from members of the board on the student calendar? And we're not voting on this tonight, it's just a first read. So, see, Mr. Fattabine.
Just a clarification, is my understanding that this current proposed calendar for 2015-2016 would comply with the regional calendar that would be implemented?
Yes.
Okay, any
No,
other?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It does not. Because the regional calendar for 15-16 insists that school districts start no later than Wednesday the 2nd. However, noticing that, I suggested that this regional calendar in 16-17 should start on no later than Thursday, which it does. So this would not be in compliance by one day. Other than that, it complies. The problem with a Wednesday start for us is that if we do our PD that way, people are coming in on Friday, which is really awkward. You know, the staff are coming in on Friday for the first day, for convocation and so forth. So the Thursday gives us the 3 staff days at the front, and then we hit the ground running. That will be permissible in 16-17. It would not be permissible in 15-16, but the legislature allows us to do our own thing this year.
I guess through me to Dr. Title.
Right. Me to you. Right.
I guess the only question then is just, so for the Wednesday the 2nd, when the SES students have school,
Yep.
we're talking like the students at aquaculture and RCA, how would that day work for them? Because I just remember when it was an issue with April break last year when we ended up
Right.
changing it because they go to school half day.
There's all different start dates. Not all those programs run through CES.
Okay.
So some of them run through Bridgeport Public Schools, some Norwalk, some are CES, and they all have different start dates. Some start on Monday, some on Tuesday, some on Wednesday. So you're always going to have some variation on that one day. But the big thing last year was that we wanted to stay.
The April break.
The April
right.
break's the key one,
Which is
because
the
that's a whole
same.
week.
Right. Correct.
Yeah, and that's the problem. So
Okay.
you know, you do have the science. You do have those other programs, but the most that can be off is maybe a day or two on the front end. I mean, a day here and there is unavoidable.
Right.
It's
okay.
the whole week that was causing a
Correct.
disruption.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Mr. Patton?
Through the chair to Dr. Tittle, the only thing that I guess just seems odd, and I guess that's just the nature of the calendars, is it seems like we lightened February vacation the last few years, and it seems like we're now ending school back to the middle part of June towards the end again, and we've lost some ground.
That's because of the late Labor Day. That's on this year.
Understood. Is there any, since you're on the regional committee, is there any discussion of starting, whatever, on Monday the 31st, or starting in that previous week at all? Nobody's doing that?
No, nobody starts that week. There are a number of school districts that start on, well, Monday the 31st. Yes, there's some that start on the Monday the 31st, not the prior week. Districts start Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the CES region. And essentially, the committee sort of looked at what was sort of the average when they started. So that's how Wednesday got on there. But the regional calendar permits you to start earlier than the recommended start date anyways. You just can't start later. So by going to Thursday, districts can still start earlier. So you have a situation where, this year we had the earliest possible start. Next year you have the latest possible start. The regional calendar does have, coincidentally, the February break that we have in it, those 2 days. In fact, the statute requires that the regional calendar have the week in April and the week in December. Doesn't allow you to put it anywhere else. But if you were to add days, next year's a particularly bad day to add days off because you're going to force yourself really late in June, and which will essentially make it very likely that you'll end up wiping out the April vacation. So it's just next year's a tough year because of the fact that you've got a late Labor Day.
Okay, anyone else on the board with comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item B, which is discussion of the 2015-16 World Language Enhancement Options, presentation by Dr. Boyce, Mr. Rafferty, Ms. Frenkel, and Ms. Cohenhoven. And that's
Come on
enclosure
up.
number 3.
I'll tee this up.
There's
Well,
no
they're coming.
PowerPoint or anything?
No, no,
right?
no,
Okay, so we can stay.
no. So let me, while they're settling in here, let me explain why you're dealing with this now, just to refresh your memory, and what's going on in the meantime. There had been on the board discussion last year during the budget process about reinstating, improving the World Language Program since it received cutback in 2011. When we had that discussion, the sort of charge to us was that obviously we know this would be a budget impact item, and that this is the curriculum review year for World Language, and that we would hold on the curriculum review in some affected grades, and try to get some idea on the budgetary impact of a variety of options on World Language. So we're bringing this up now so you understand the feeling of the professionals, the World Language teachers and administration, the principals who've all been involved with this, in terms of the changes to World Language that we would recommend. And you also understand the budget implications. And to the extent that the board has a strong feeling, it's not a voting item, strong feeling about what direction we should take when we put the budget together, that would be appreciated. We had to address several, well, there's two basic issues that I'm going to turn it over, believe me, I'm not going to steal all your thunder. The question was what to do with sixth grade. That's a multifaceted issue, because it was not just cut back in terms of the time, but it always had been taught in this sort of awkward way where the instruction occurred sort of in the middle of a language arts block and was disruptive, not just, it wasn't just it was problematic in terms of teaching the world language, but it was also problematic in terms of language arts instruction. So that issue was front and center as something that needed to be addressed. And then the question was, what should we do at the elementary level? Should we simply reinstate what was there? There are a lot of other options. What would be the best move there? So that's sort of how it came to you. And I'm going to turn it over to the group here in front of you to give a little overview of this, and then like to hear the board's thoughts on where direction you'd like us to go with it, knowing the costs of it and what the budget implications might be.
First of all, I'd like to thank the teachers in the World Language Department who have had a very busy year. They not only have been looking at this program, they've been revising and reviewing their curriculum. Under the leadership of Jennifer Cohen-Hoven, who is our coordinator for World Language for grades 4 through 8, and Eileen Frankel, who is the high school World Language coordinator, and their leadership has been invaluable. The proposal I sent to you, that Mike Rafferty and I sent to you in the memo, outlines how we would offer world language from how we suggest world language be delivered in grades starting in kindergarten through the current grades. Currently, we begin in grade 4 and 5 and bring it up all the way, obviously, into the high school. The world language teachers are very excited about the opportunity to expand what we think is absolutely vital for our students in what is truly a global society, the option to learn and become fluent in a second language. And our recommendation, as you read here, would be to, if we had to make a choice, to expand the 6th grade offerings to include Spanish and French, which is currently the offering in 7th and 8th, and then to offer students Spanish starting in kindergarten. And that was done after a great deal of thought and looking at other districts and looking at research and looking what we thought was the best course of action for our own program. So we'd like to respond to your questions.
Actually, I think there's one thing you need to explain.
Okay.
In the 6th grade, someone's liable to ask this, so I'll ask it. In the 6th grade, why, if we're adding world language, would we have to add FTE for reading?
Okay. The middle schools have a 7-period day plus lunch, and so currently what happens in grades 7 and 8 are some students take world language, however, some need additional support in reading, and they do not take world language. During that period, they're offered the additional support in reading. In 6th grade, if we were to offer a full period of world language, there would be some students who would need additional support in reading, and so we'd have to include a reading teacher, because currently our English teachers teach a double block of English language arts that is impacted by this 25 minutes of Spanish. So to accommodate students who are not ready to begin world language because they need additional reading support in 6th grade, we would have to add reading staff.
One more thing you need to explain, or I'll do it for you. In the proposal, it's on the pages, it's the 2nd page. We're talking about 6th grade because it's a little confusing to people, is that essentially the most effective way to implement this, in our view, is to essentially have the 6th grade follow a schedule similar to 7th and 8th grade, which would be, rather than having teams of 3, you'd have teams of 4, by and large. That's the simple version. When you do that, by going to teams of 4 in 6th grade, and that means that a student has 7 teachers a day instead of 6, the way it works with the current enrollment is that in one school, if you have teams of 4, you can service that school with 2 teams of 4. So a total of 8 core teachers. If you don't do that, if we say, no, we're not doing this at all, then, and you revert to 3-person teams, then you need to have 3 3-person teams to service those students, just the way the math works and the class loads. So by going to this, you save, that's why it says there's 1 FTE in core classes for $64,000. That's why that happens. It doesn't impact the other 2 schools. The FTEs in the core classes are not impacted. So that brings the net cost down. Instead of being the 5.8, it saves an extra FTE. So your net cost there for the sixth grade is $295,024 plus the cost of the textbooks. So I just want to, do I have that right?
Yes.
I see principals in the back. I've got elementary, middle school principals here. Did I get that right, Gary? Okay. All right. So I just want to clear that up because sixth grade's the most confusing part of it. And I also want to make one other point. I really will stop in a second.
Okay.
So why would we not start this in kindergarten and work our way up? I mean, it's sort of, you think about, let's roll a program up as the kids move up. Here's the problem. It's always a nice thought that we'll continue to expand this program every single year. However, fiscal realities often get in the way of that. And the last thing you want to do is start a kindergartner or starting K in 1, and then say the next year you don't have the money to expand, and now you've stranded a kid. So it actually makes sense to backwards map it and strengthen your sixth grade program, get those kids up and going, and then back it down from there, add third, then second, then first, at whatever chunk you can bite off. If you can bite the whole thing off at once, it's a moot point. I'm just not sure a budget's going to be able to pass with that. So that's why I've seen this happen in other places, where you start with kindergarten, and the kindergartners get all excited, and then there's no first grade for them because budgets get cut. So I just want to know, that's the rationale for the backwards implementation schedule. That would be our recommendation on that. Now I'm going to stop, really.
Okay, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just two quick questions to start with. First, as another potential additional cost, with Ms. Cohen covering from 4 to 8, is there a budget implication of changing that to K to 8? Or can one person still do the teaching load that she does plus this administrative duty? Because I didn't, unless I missed it, I didn't see any money in here for administration.
It's a good question.
Perhaps premature? I'm just tossing it out there.
You know, I'm not sure that I'm completely convinced we're going to go all the way K to 8 in 1 year, so I didn't really think about it.
Okay.
And I think at some point, I think the board, and you're going to love this, at some point, if we're really going to treat world language the way we treat the other core content areas,
Curriculum leader.
there you go.
I said it, you didn't have to.
Right, thank you. Down the road. But I think that it's possible that what you might have is, we might have to redivide. You know, it might have to be, you know, an additional stipend or something along those lines. But it probably wouldn't be a, probably wouldn't be a deal breaker, not compared to these other costs.
Okay. And then I just had a second question. Because I have
Over to
to
you.
ask, how is it that they would take it for 6 years and then be in sixth grade at Spanish 1? What exactly have they learned for 6 years that they would be? I definitely understand the idea in middle school of Spanish 1 being divided over 2 years. I know that was my experience with it, and I thought that was entirely appropriate. But unless I'm misreading it, or this is just part of the mapping of it, if a student did start in kindergarten in Spanish, why would they be Spanish 1 in sixth grade?
Well, I'm not a world language expert, so if I misspeak, I'll let Jennifer jump in. But the design of the program is exploratory in nature and giving children exposure to language and the study of language through vocabulary and culture. So the emphasis isn't really on being a Spanish speaker in the elementary schools. So when you move into Spanish 1, I believe the focus of the instruction, correct me if I'm wrong, changes to becoming more of a Spanish speaker. With the amount of exposure that children would have, some being only 25 minutes twice a week, it might be a little bit premature to assume that we could move them further on to Spanish too. But
My take on that would be that, first of all, it'd be a long time before the kindergarten kid got to sixth grade to worry about it.
Right.
Okay? So I think you'd start out with this model, knowing that most of the kids have had relatively little exposure up to this point. 2 or 3 years down the road, if they're knocking it out of the park, and we think that they can do, I mean, it's possible a kid could do Spanish 1. I mean, it's possible it could be enhanced. But I think even if you implemented the full-blown program, by the time you got to that situation, it's going to be several years down the road. So we're just trying to make up for some lost time right now. And you also have to understand, as part of this, then another thought, thank you for spurring my thinking on this, that, remember, there's always trade-offs with this in terms of instructional time. And there's no free time. Well, there is free time at the high school. We've created time out of thin air with the high school schedule, but there is no time created out of thin air here. So at the elementary level and at the middle level, the time is coming from somewhere. Right. All right, and so we're trying to balance off, you know, a program that's appropriate at those levels, but not taking away large chunks of time from language arts and math. Hence, I think that was the rationale for not expanding the 4th and 5th grade, because there's a lot of pull-out and a lot of takeaways in 4th and 5th grade, but to enhance the program at the lower grades if we were going to do it that way. So remember, there's still this time, this opportunity cost of time to teach the other core subjects that we're trying to be mindful of here. So we're kind of walking a tightrope. But to your specific question, I think that's down the road. We might change it, but I think initially it's a non-issue.
Thank you. Okay, other questions from the board? Mrs. Lou McCormick.
First of all, I was very excited to see the prospect of you adding language all the way down to kindergarten. But after listening to Mrs. Maxim Kennelly's comments, it sparks a thought in my mind, and this goes back to this idea of planning K through 12 and sequencing. And are we actually building sequentially, or is the elementary curriculum separate and distinct from the middle school, which is then separate from the high school? So, for example, could we not be planning for 3 years in elementary to cover the same thing as Spanish 1? So that by the time they arrive at 6th grade, as Mrs. Kennelly had said, we've used 3 years to cover Spanish 1, but now they've accomplished something and now they move to Spanish 2. In which case, I would find that, because to me the skill in the language, okay, so there's cultural awareness, that's always very nice. And once a week exposure is nice. You can kind of, you know, you can watch Dora the Explorer, and, you know, I've sent my kids to language school for an hour a week. They're not going to become fluent based on that, and that's with intensive language. Language comes from continual exposure, from immersion, from it becoming part. So a slight reminder once a week isn't going to be as effective at any age, really, versus continual exposure, even for small periods of time. So I guess my question is did you consider, and I'm curious what other districts have done during your research, who have started earlier, because I think the initiative to start earlier is exactly spot on with language. You can't start language early enough. The younger the child is, the easier they learn. You teach them in kindergarten, they're going to learn a lot easier than if you teach them in 6th or 7th grade. That's just a fact. But I get that there's a trade-off, and you want to be able to continue and only have so many funds. So again, you know, just to reiterate what my concern is, I am concerned that there is a straight-through process, that in fact what we're teaching them in the early years is actually directly building and as efficient as possible so that we are advancing their progress in the language, because the language is the skill.
I'm going to let our world language experts address most of your question, but I just wanted to point out one thing first. When we teach, which is essentially level 10, the first year of French or Spanish in middle school, it is the high school course that we're teaching. So when we teach level 10 currently in 7th grade and level 20 in 8th grade, it is to prepare them to take level 30 in 9th grade. So they're taking high school level courses in middle school. So yes, there is a very clear attention being paid to the sequence of courses from middle into high. So I'm going to ask either Jennifer or Eileen to talk about the elementary program and how that connects to what we do in middle school.
I can talk about the plan for such an elementary program. And I can talk a little bit about what some of the other districts are doing who do have it down in kindergarten. They offer it more frequently on shorter time during the day. And we have contractual language that says 25 minutes. So we were working with that. But it is similar to a number of districts in the...
Wait, before you move on, can you just explain that? So we have, our town versus other towns have a 25-minute contract?
I'm not the expert on that.
Want Ann to talk about this? Yeah, come on up.
Currently, in the FEA contract, there is language that the class periods cannot be less than 25 minutes in world language.
And is that a common stipulation?
I don't know.
It seems to be
I
that.
can't speak to other districts, but it is in place in our contract presently, and we've just agreed to a new contract going forward, and that language still exists.
So perhaps we should earmark that and understand whether, in fact, removing that stipulation might be beneficial in the long run and how other districts
We have a new
manage-
contract now that is
I
in
know.
effect for 3 years.
But
Yeah.
we have after that contract.
2018,
Yeah,
right, yeah,
I mean,
okay.
and I'm sure it's going to take time to analyze it and figure it out and then look forward to. But if that's something that's worth pursuing and other districts have successfully implemented that, then maybe we look forward, because we are going to revisit the World Language Program again at some point, so, yeah.
It does-
Do you have any further question, Mrs. Lim McCormick?
Oh, she didn't
Did
have
Jennifer, do you
Oh,
want to
sorry,
finish your...
right, Mrs. Cohenhoven, sorry.
I think
I
Jennifer
just
was going to be
wanna-
describing the program a little bit.
Just want to finish with, you mentioned sequence of coursework, and you brought up the question of Spanish 1, and things are a little bit different in terms of Spanish 1, and over a couple of years, we are looking from the 6th grade and up to be producing the speakers, the communication and things like that. So in the elementary school, what we're looking for is to spark excitement and an interest and grab the students when they are capable of absorbing the early languages. We would be looking at creating the curriculum coinciding with the elementary curriculum in terms of ELA and other Common Core to support that. So it would be, it would not be appropriate to bring a Spanish 1 down to that level. Foreign language in the elementary school and foreign language exploratory programs go more of a thematic approach in the elementary school.
The other thing I would say is that we can call the course Spanish 10, 20, 30. We write the curriculum for that, right? So if we were to find that what we call Spanish 10 at the high school, because the kids have this additional exposure, you could still call it Spanish 10, but you could ramp up the expectations of kids in Spanish 10. It just may be called the same thing. So it's not like there's a universal curriculum for that. So it's possible that kids could be accelerated, but you'd have to have several years of this, through the elementary schools to see it. But we could always adjust the curriculum going forward if we found out the kids had achieved certain skills and were able to carry them forward into the 6th and 7th grades. Then the teachers could simply accelerate the pace and expect more from the kids.
Well, I guess so in response to that, I guess it depends on what we're expecting the kids to have achieved by the end of 5th grade.
Correct.
Right? So I guess that's my question. What are we
Right.
expecting them to achieve by the end of 5th grade? And will they then be on a faster track? Or are we expecting them to really start from scratch and it's as if they hadn't taken it at all and they just have some cultural or are we actually expecting them to have progressed quite a bit so that we will be ramping up our curriculum all the way through, since we're reviewing all of world language, right? K through 12. So are we ramping up the entire curriculum going forward? Or is it that we're just adding this little adjunct?
It's really a matter of being able to allow for more depth at the upper levels. I was just thinking today in terms of what our students are able to do now as opposed to what they may have been able to do prior to the cuts. And we would really be able to see in 6 and above, the kids are really hitting the ground running, ready to go, taking the topics that we're discussing to a deeper level, higher rigor and such, once they have the foundation from the elementary school.
And to answer part of your question, yes, we are looking at developing a much more rigorous world language curriculum in the documents you're going to see later in the school year. We're working on curriculum that I believe is going to be very close to cutting edge. We can't find very many other districts in Connecticut that are going to be designing and developing curriculum as we have, and I'm very excited about the work the teachers have done. It's starting with the AP course which is now based on thematic units working backwards. they've really accomplished a great deal, and we'll be bringing that to you later this year. But there's always room in curriculum. Curriculum is a living document, so it's always possible, after a curriculum is in use for several years, if we say, we're really finding students coming to middle school with a much broader and deeper knowledge of Spanish than we ever anticipated would happen, then we'll go in and we'll revise the curriculum. That's very doable.
Well, I guess is that our expectation? Are we expecting a certain level of fluency by the time they leave 5th grade? I know, I think Easton starts in kindergarten. I'm not sure about Wilton. But I'm just curious, certain schools expect a certain degree of fluency, they can have a light conversation. Hi, my name is so-and-so, I live here, the weather is very nice outside, blah, 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 blah. How are we going to assess the effectiveness? What are we expecting? What goals are we setting, and how are we going to assess it?
So it's a little hard to answer that question because we're trying to get our marching orders. So if we have our marching orders, we would certainly consult how other districts use it and plan their curriculum. And we wouldn't just leave it up to chance. We'd put the world language teachers together and build a plan that gets us to where we want.
Well, so that's I guess, will you be presenting to us what you're planning your curriculum to achieve? Or is this a circular reference where you don't want to tell us what you're planning because you haven't planned it yet, but you want approval to go ahead and figure out what to plan, in which case it's a circular reference?
Curriculum documents that you'll see later this year will tell you exactly what we want students to achieve. But we need to know what grades we're writing the curriculum documents for, because right now we're working on grades 4 through 12.
Right.
And so if other grades need to be added to that, obviously there's going to be an impact, a domino effect on the curriculum documents for all of elementary.
So you want us to come back, you're looking for the grade guidance?
Well, I think that we may,
It's money.
right, I mean.
Looking just for the dollars, and then you'll run scenarios on the dollars.
Time and
Right.
money.
Look, I think that this is one of these things where it's going to be really hard for the board to make any decision right now. You got to see it in the context of the whole budget and everything else that's driving it, and then ultimately, you may not be able to make a final decision on this until May, or maybe you can. But I think that at the moment, the secondary curriculum is being written because we know from grades, say, 7 to 12, we know what we have. And so that we know is coming forward. We may have to adjust the 6th grade based on what happens here. We may need to, may or may not be able to get the elementary done depending on how things go. So this is a bit of an iterative process. I know it sounds kind of wishy, but I'd hate to have them spend a lot of time writing a K-3 curriculum when realistically it's not likely to go into the budget pot by the end of the year. Or they can write the curriculum as if it would be, and then if it doesn't get implemented, it doesn't get implemented. So this is the betwixt and between on this. How much of this do you really want to, bite off? In my view, we would consider ourselves very lucky in this fiscal environment, very fortunate in this fiscal environment to be able to get $370,000 of a program enhancement into the budget, much less the entire elementary one. But if you'd like me to try and show you what that number looks like, okay. But, so we're kind of looking for a little guidance without, you're kind of deciding it in a vacuum because you don't know what else is in the budget. So the curriculum development is a bit up in the air, except at the secondary level, right?
Okay, I think we had a few other board, are you done with your questions? Okay, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, sorry.
So just to follow up on that, procedurally, what is it that the boards, we knew back in August when we received the district initiatives that this was going to be coming before us twice. First, to get direction with the budget impact, because if we said, no, we're not spending it, then let's not waste their time.
Correct.
But what is the procedure for giving that input to you and your staff? Are we taking a vote? Is that at the December meeting? Are we just saying now, thumbs up, thumbs down? What's the methodology here?
It's really however you want to do it. I know there's no vote. It's not a voting item, so we can't make it one. It could be, look, do the budget, do your best, get at least the 6th grade in. If you can find a way to shoehorn the other one in, fine. Or put it all in, we'll take it out if we think it's too much. Or it's, forget it, this is way too much money, it'll never get supported. you know, and you all may have different opinions on it. See, that's the problem. That's why the superintendent does a budget, and then you get to play with it. But I am interested, I think they're interested in the general sense of where people are. Now, we've got a couple people missing also, which is also part of it. So we would, any commentary you have on this proposal, we'd like to take that into consideration in budget development. That's the idea of this.
Okay, I think Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Patton.
I think it's a good proposal. The question always comes down to money and what the trade-offs may be, and that I don't know if can be answered. If the decision is to expend additional funds to enhance the world language program, the question in the abstract is fine for today, but during the budget cycle, the question is going to be, with a fixed dollar budget, what trade-off do we make? And even though I support this today, not knowing what that trade-off is going to be, I may not support it tomorrow because that trade-off is too costly for what I thought the benefit was in world language. So that is a difficult thing to determine. But in concept or generally, it'd be nice to enhance the world language. The other concern I have is that without some expectation of an enhanced curriculum for grade 8 or the other grades as well, it's hard-pressed to justify the expense of additional sums to end up in grade 8 where we are today without the enhancements. So in other words, if now we're saying in grade 8 students are mastering Spanish 20 currently, and at the end of this enhanced program with additional funding, they're still mastering the equivalent of Spanish 20 in grade 8, we haven't really advanced student achievement. We're just reinforcing student achievement of a certain level. So I think the expectation would be if you devote more resources and funds to the program, you're going to be at a better achievement level than you are today, which would inherently require, or the expectation of a corresponding change in curriculum. So you'd want to see, if you go forward with this, you want to see that change curriculum proposal to be adjusted to enhance student achievement.
We had a conversation about that, and we debated whether we should devote 6th and 7th grade to the first year of the language, level 10, or whether to try to get students through the 3 levels of the language by the end of the 8th grade. And frankly, we had some serious reservations about building students' capacity well enough to say they could start level 4 in 9th grade. We don't think we're there right now. We think that there's a lot more we can do and developmentally for middle school students also. I think it's a huge advantage for them to have the extra time to really learn the language, to internalize the language. That foundational year becomes very important that we can then build upon as they move through the levels. Which isn't to say, if we had a full K through 12 program, as we said a few minutes ago, we wouldn't need to go back and revisit what we do in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We just didn't feel that we were ready to move there yet.
Do you have any further questions? Okay. Mr. Dwyer and then Mr. Patton.
Actually, I think this is a wonderful example of how a board and a superintendent work together. For those of us who were elected in 2011 and had to face the public and say, yes, the most significant reduction of service in that year was the loss of a portion of the world language program. And I would include Mr. Convertito in his absence, because I'm sure he would say that after several years of advocacy to encourage the staff to figure out how to get this back in, I agree with Mr. Fattabine. We have a good proposal in front of us. It didn't come out of thin air. It came out of the members of this board and this board saying, let's try and figure this out. I think you would be hard-pressed to put in the whole $700 and some odd thousand in this year's budget. I think that would just be a target for some people to look at. But I do think that if you start in 6th grade and the following year we get down into 3rd, and then the next year we finish the K-1-2, that we make a commitment as a board that we are going to move this forward in a financially responsible manner, a little bit at a time, so that we can fit it in within other budgetary issues. If this is going to work, all 9 of us have to show up at Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM meetings to say, academically, this is important to our children. And so this is worth the money. And yes, there are always trade-offs. There's trade-offs in instructional time. There's trade-offs in budget. But some of us ran in 2011 saying, we've got to find a solution to this. I think this is a good solution. I'd say put in the 6th grade, and we'll, then when we look at the whole context, we'll know whether we can keep it or not.
Okay, Mr. Patton and then Mr. Llewellyn.
Last year, during the budget discussions, we had talked about enhancing the 6th grade program to at least, keep it on even keel to what it was before. And again, sadly, that motion failed. But I think this is a great start. I think we're all, I don't know, all of us in agreement, but many of us are in agreement on the financial implications of a, $740,000+, budget increase to put the whole program in place in one shot. So in terms of direction, the 6th grade program, as you've presented here, basics, I'm not sure how the 6th grade teachers or team leaders will feel about losing, some ELA, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. I think absolutely, in my opinion, you should go forth with that. I'd like to see, even if there are no additional budget implications on the elementary level, with keeping with 4th and 5th grade where we have, some now, I'm not entirely comfortable with the 2-day rotation in the 2 periods in a 6-day rotation, which technically is less than what we have now. I guess, and originally I would have suggested maybe there's a way to shorten those periods to get more repetition, because everybody consistently says that with world language. You have to have repetition. I know in our religious school with my kids, we used to have a 3-day religious school, and due to various factors, that was changed to a 2-day religious school, and then the Hebrew aspect of it, kids just are naturally not going to have that repetition. They're going to learn less. So if there's a way to tweak that 4th and 5th grade aspect in terms of the rotation to enhance it, I know obviously we can't change the 25-minute period. Maybe there's a legal loophole or something we can do. I don't know, but I'd like to see that happen.
I'm sorry, Mr. Patton. Dr. Tuttle said
I just
he
want to
had
mention
just one thing he wanted to touch on there.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary and Chair. Through the Secretary to the Chair and back to me, cracks me up. All right. I want to talk about that rotation a bit, okay? We're not sure we're going to a 6-day rotation next year in the elementary. Right now, we have a 5-day rotation. We've got proposals that are being reviewed by the elementary leadership team. We went to a 5-day rotation with the A, B, C, D, E, as opposed to the set days. And we have to look at the budget implications of a 6-day schedule rotation. So it could be that we stay with the 5-day rotation, and that would mean that there would be no reduction in grades 4 and 5 going forward. So that's not a done deal. That this was preliminary based on a possibility, but we're trying to cost that out, that 6-day rotation. That may be too costly. May not be. We're still working on it. The other thing I should tell you is that I did implement world language K-12 in a prior district in which every kid got it every single day for a very short period of time. At kindergarten and 1st grade, they got it for 10 minutes a day. And the teacher ran around from class to class, basically taught, every single classroom every single day for 10 minutes. They were in a cart and they were running. And it is horrible. It is not an effective way. I mean, it may be fine from the perspective maybe of the kids receiving it, but from the teacher's point of view, it was a huge burnout problem. And so I understand why the language is sort of a minimum, because if you make it too short, there's some educational issues with that, but also if you've got a teacher running around trying to teach 30 classes a day that are all 10 minutes long, it really can be troublesome. So we might want to try to work on the contract language as a separate issue, but right now there's actually a good educational reason why there's a minimum length of time, and it's to avoid the teachers burning out, which world language teachers are hard enough to find. We don't want to make their lives any more difficult.
Well, people remember we used to have 4 days a week, correct?
Yeah, it used to be 4 days a week, and the cutback made it 2 days a week. But because of all the demands on instructional time in 4th and 5th grade, it was really the judgment of the elementary team that the enhancement at the elementary level would be focused on K to 3. That was the best trade-off between the core subject area needs, because in the 4th and 5th grade, we have band, chorus, orchestra, lessons, what else? Lots. That pull the kids out of the academics, and so I think that was part of the thinking, right, Mike?
Yeah, it's a scheduling matrix, and just by locking on that 25-minute is really not the appropriate way to look at it. There's a lot of transition issues that happen. Aside from a teacher burnout, transitioning kids back and forth constantly all day long is another issue for us. So I think every principal in town could tell you it's a real struggle to schedule all of these activities each year. And I think as we see, this is Dr. Heidel mentioned earlier. There is no extra time just floating around. It would be yet another matrix for us to uncover. So I think it's worth noting.
Mr. Patton, are you done with your questions?
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. Lou McCormick and Mr. Llewellyn.
So I do want you to know, despite all my questions, I'm fully supportive of language, and I don't think we invest enough in it. And if it were up to me, I would say that, rather than taking the approach that we keep having to increase the budget and sell everybody to increase our budget, I would say that we need to prioritize our budget better and find the money for world language, because world language is a skill for the 21st century that is paramount. I mean, there are so many paramount skills that we can't afford to cut that one. Let's put it that way. We should be investing in it. If it's $700,000, it's $700,000. I don't necessarily agree with how you're spending the $700,000 in this proposal. However, it's a great start, and I would say that I'd love to hear more, and I'd love to hear the analysis that you have and why you've arrived at this, and I hear some of the scheduling restrictions, but I'd like to hear more. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't want to end the conversation that is driving how we're teaching our kids if it's not optimal. That maybe we can look to other more creative solutions. Maybe you get ideas from other parents, from other people who are bilingual in multiple languages, how they learned, what the effective strategies are. There's lots of ways to approach language, and I would say that I fully support an investment of $700,000. I would invest more over time. However, I would like deep thought and research so that if we're going to spend that kind of money, because we know how precious money is in this town, that we make sure we're spending it effectively with a longer-term plan in mind.
Mr. Llewellyn.
A couple of quick comments. I too think that language would be great at an earlier age, but I do have the concern that, it's what came first, the curriculum, or I should say the standards, or the cost. But I think it would be really helpful to explore, what does $60,000 for a kindergartner get us at the end of the school year? Are they able to count to 10, or are they just, getting cultural awareness? I think the other thing that would be worth exploring, and it's kind of contradictory to what Dr. Title said, is, does the teacher's contract state that the teacher cannot teach for less than 25 minutes, or does it state that the student can't learn for less than 25 minutes? And if that's the case, could a teacher do 2 10-minute segments? Because in elementary, the classroom's a butt. It's kind of a shame that we actually don't know what the contract looks like, because we voted on it a couple weeks ago, but we've yet to see it. So, had any of us even known that was there, but it wasn't presented to us, so we didn't have input. I mean, it would have been great if that whole thing had been shaped with this in mind. But I think that it would be great to understand at each grade level what our, basic skills we're trying to acquire are. But I would encourage exploring it as well. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Did we not get I thought we did get the contract.
You may have, I didn't.
Mr. Dwyer?
The contract is a public document. The comment that Mrs. Leffert made about this has been in prior contracts, you could get all 7 bargaining units contracts simply by calling the HR office and read through all of it.
And
We
I did actually
presented-
request what the differences in contracts were, Phil, and got no response.
Yeah, we presented the memo that said, here are the changes from the prior contract. There was no change in that particular provision, and it was in a public document that's available.
I think the
We've
timing
not
was...
seen the contract, Phil, have we? Has it been sent to us? Was it sent to us prior to our vote?
When I joined the board, I asked for a copy of each of the
Was
contracts.
what we
and I
voted
got it.
on sent to us prior to our vote?
I've received a copy of the contract, and those
You
members...
have, you
who-
negotiated. How about the rest of
Those
us?
members who have asked for a contract get it.
I thought I did, sorry.
The, let me go back, the timing on the, forgetting about that part of it for a second. The timing on this was a little unfortunate in that regard, because really didn't start this venture until the fall. By then, we were, as you know, deep into negotiations, and really, it sort of, the timing just didn't work in terms of, you know, could we have tried to explore this at the table? Now, there's always a possibility, and for issues like this, you never know how it's going to play out, but there are provisions for side letters to occur. There are provisions to negotiate a potential amendment. There's no guarantee of success, but there's no guarantee of success in negotiations, that just because you put it on the table that it will end up in the contract. So I think there's definitely more questions about the, say, the elementary program than we have about the secondary program. So I'm sort of leaning towards we've got a sort of more fully developed curriculum and skill matrix at the secondary level, and I think if we could beef up the 6th grade, as I said at the beginning, that's our first priority. I think a lot of you have brought up a lot of questions and issues around the elementary, and so, you may not be as comfortable putting that in the budget without, answers to that, and that will take quite a bit more time. So, I think I've got some pretty good ideas. The board generally supports this. Some people are concerned about how much. Some people would like the whole thing in. And again, I would invite you, if you have any particular opinions about it, if you want to talk to me individually. We have, we're in budget development right now. I'll see what we can do, but of course, once you get the budget, you can adjust it. And as, boards have done. So I'll do my best to get as much of this in as I can and still present, a fiscally responsible budget. And
any other-
something I know that means a lot to the board, and so I want to try to be on the same page with you on this.
Any other questions from the board? So I guess the next time that we will have any discussion about this will be when we get the budget
budget,
in
right.
January? So that's
Yes.
January 13th, I
Yeah,
believe?
when I present the budget, it'll be clear, this will be obviously a key enhancement to the budget, and it will be clearly labeled as to what I've put in there. And if I've missed the mark badly, then I'm sure you'll all let me know.
And I guess the other question then is that if board members do have, individual board members have questions or comments or need more follow-up, that they should contact you or Dr. Boyce or both?
Depends on the
Just-
nature of the question.
Okay,
We
so
have
just start
wonderful
maybe...
expertise right here in terms of
Okay, or
curriculum
Mr.
instruction.
Rafferty.
Feel free to contact.
Okay, so just if people have
Anybody.
questions, they should contact Dr. Tuttle,
Right.
Mr. Rafferty.
And we'll get you to the right person.
We already have some we're going to work on, and any other questions that come up.
Right, and they're working on the curriculum right now, so it could be, 3 or 4 months from now, we'll have more answers than we have right now.
Okay, so
Okay,
I guess
good.
that's it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we'll move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
So the next item is the approval of minutes. A, approval of minutes of the October 21st, 2014 special meeting. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of October 21st, 2014. Is there a motion? Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Any questions or comments? Okay, we've lost somebody, it looks like. So we're down to 6 now. Correct? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, so no comments. Vote, all in favor of the minutes, raise your hand. It is unanimous, 6-0. Okay, the next item is approval of the minutes of October 21st regular meeting. The recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of October 21st, 2014, moved by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Any questions on these minutes? Seeing none, I'll have a vote. All in favor, raise your hand. Mrs. Gerber, oh, it's unanimous. Okay, on to C, approval of minutes of November 12th, 2014 special meeting. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of November 12th, 2014, moved by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. And any questions or comments on these minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous, 6-0. Okay, so we are on to number 8, Superintendent's Report, new high school schedule.
Okay. So let me just tee this up. There's no official PowerPoint on this. This is, I want to reference, you have 3 documents in your packet. Well, you have 3 documents that were given to you. 2 I think, are in the packet. There was a memo dated November 7th that was written from Dr. Boyce to myself about the high school schedule. That was sent out because we were holding parent meetings and there was no board meeting in the interim, and we wanted you to be, informed about it. That was a 7-page document. Then you also have the copy of the PowerPoint slides from the 2 parent presentations that were done recently. Those are all in there, which is an overview of the changes and the advantages. And then there's also another handout called High School Schedule Information that it's unauthored, but I'm guessing it was a handout to the parents. At the same parent meeting, they got a handout as well as the PowerPoint. As far as I can tell, the historians here tell me that since at least 2002, this school district has been trying to change the high school schedule. Some of that was prompted by data that showed that our high school students were getting substantially fewer instructional hours than the state average and many of our counterpart districts. Some of that was also driven by the fact that students were having to opt to take lunch or another class, or not take lunch at all if they took 7 classes instead of 8, that if their open period happened to be first period or last period, it really wasn't conducive to a lunch anyways, that it was a frenetic pace to the schedule, and that there have been several attempts historically to make this happen. And it's been a concern of a number of people in this town long before I arrived on the scene. I haven't dug up all the history of it, but people with more history than I have said this has been one of the holy grails. This is right up there with the Fairfield-Ludlow windows. So, the most recent attempt to do this it didn't work out for a number of reasons, and it kind of went underground for a little while. And we brought it up as, I brought it up as one of my initiatives for this year so we could implement it next year, and then ultimately it was adopted by the board as a goal. This is one of the board goals. And we have delivered a schedule. It is not finished 100% yet. We are still tweaking it. There is still more work to be done on it. It is incredibly complicated to do this. And so we have substantially increased instructional hours. We have created a regular lunch for high school students. We have created a less frenetic pace to the day. In fact, the day 1, day 2 schedule is actually much more reminiscent of a college schedule. The AB People have been running these AB blocks for 20 years, at least, or some variation of them. And we've done it for essentially no cost. So we think the basic structure of this is going to work. I will tell you that you will see, likely, in the budget, you will see some additional staff at the high school that will be necessary. But that's an enrollment issue, not a schedule issue. In other words, there's going to be about 80 more students in the high school next year. So we would need additional staff to cover them. But we are not, at this point, attributing any substantial amount of money to the schedule itself. This is really not a significant cost item. It'll be hard to tease it out at the end, but basically, that was one of the huge concerns the last time around. So you've got the details in front of you. There were a lot of choices. It's so complicated. We did hire somebody with real expertise to help us walk through the options. There was substantial faculty input into this, but there are also 250 or some odd high school teachers. If you can find a schedule that doesn't have a couple people squawking about it, you haven't come up with a good schedule. If you're waiting for a high school schedule that no teacher will send any email to any parent saying that this is not good, you will never have a changed high school schedule. We had some comments earlier about the status quo. Well, this is change. Change is going to cause friction. And as a result of the friction, I think we talked about this when it was a board goal, that this is something we've wanted, the community have wanted. Yes, it's not perfect. It'll be close, as close as it can be. But if you want a schedule that nobody will squawk about, or any other change effort that nobody will squawk about, we might as well not bring you any change efforts. Okay? So that's my background on this. You have the documents. We have a lot of people who can respond to questions. I see Mr. Hatzis and Mr. Coyne are back there. I see some curriculum readers. Mr. Smoller is still here. Dr. Boyce is here. Mrs. Parks. We've had a lot of hands in this. So at this point, I think I'll open it up to any questions the board may have about it, knowing that it's a work in progress, and I'll probably defer to some of the people that are really much closer to it. But I'm really pleased with the work the committee did and is able to meet the board goal and something this community has wanted for a long time without a big burden on the taxpayers.
Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Mr. Fattabine.
Sure, I've got a couple questions, and actually, first a comment. I think as a board, we'd probably appreciate getting these documents ahead of the rest of kind of the town. I think over the last couple months, there have been a whole lot of documents that have gone before other boards, before they've come to us, or in this case, rolled out to the public before they came to us. I understand in emergency situations, but I'm not sure this was an emergency. That's just a general comment. We seem to be the last people finding out about certain things. In terms of the cost, what do you see the cost, and how is the cost of this so much less than the 2 point whatever million it was going to be several years ago? What's fundamentally changed?
Well, I wasn't here then.
Okay.
One of the analysis that we did this year, and people can jump in on this, that I don't believe was done the last time, was the group went through with the help of the facilitator to say, how much capacity do we have in some of our electives, where if kids elected those courses, we could fit them in, no additional staff would be needed. And that analysis, up to, say, the contractual limits, obviously. I don't think that analysis was necessarily done the last time, but I wasn't here the last time. And so the other consideration here is that I'm not sure what assumptions were made about how many kids were going to take the 8th period who aren't already taking it. So right now, what percentage of kids take 8 periods? Like about a third of them? Is that roughly right? I'm looking at the headmasters, or about a third take 8 periods already. So they're already scheduled up. We don't need staff for them. I think there might have been an assumption. Again, they looked at the work that was done by the previous group. In fact, the guiding principles are exactly the same. I think there might have been an assumption that every single kid was going to take an 8th period, and we'd have to staff up for that. And if we have, 2,000 kids, all taking this many classes that will require this many teachers.
Right.
When the fact is that there's no guarantee that every single kid will get every elective they want in any schedule, and that they may be, due to staffing limitations, some kids may not be able to get the elective they want, and they may just have to wait till they're a junior or a senior to get it. In other words, like a college, courses close out,
Right.
and then it's a priority is given. So we also know there's some kids who, even with the opportunity to take an 8th class, won't take it. They want the study period or whatever it is. They just, particularly freshmen. I'm not sure it's a great idea for freshmen necessarily to take 8, depending on the nature of it. So I think it was a more fine-tuned analysis, but at the end of the day, we can control that because we only have so many staff to go around. And if we have this overage of kids that want to take a certain class and we don't have the staff to do it and we can't find a way to hire somebody extra, then we'll have to close off some classes. And I don't think that assumption was ever done. I think the assumption was everybody's going to get everything and everybody's going to take everything. And if you do that, 2/3 of the kids taking an extra class, that adds up rapidly. Can anybody want to comment on that perspective, or did I just summarize it?
May I speak to that point?
You certainly may. I don't know if the people with the history here that I don't have can fill in the blanks on it, but I think that's basically the analysis that was done. Maybe it wasn't as in depth.
I was at the meeting where this was discussed, and the key difference, because obviously what Mr. Llewellyn is referencing is multi-million-dollar impact. What had happened when it was brought up that last time was a conflating of the high school cafeteria with the high school schedule. That to implement the high school schedule involved multi-millions because it therefore involved needing to expand the cafeteria. So it wasn't the high school schedule that cost multi-millions, it was the cafeteria, which we have now very clearly divorced from each other. And so that's the key difference from that last attempted implementation.
Gotcha, okay.
Right.
And then, thank you, and then, actually, that's helpful. Now, in terms of the increased overall instructional time, the 927 that you reference on, well, page 5 of the double print, I'm not sure what page it would be. I'm in this one here.
Yeah.
Does that include study hall hours? Because I remember when we compared hours to other districts in the past, they didn't.
I think that's total hours available, right? Total available hours. Whether a kid takes all the available hours is up to the kid.
Okay.
So in other words, this is the available hours. So if you took 8 periods, let's say you took a full schedule.
Right.
You would get 927 hours right now under the current schedule. Next year under the current schedule, you would get 1019. That's the difference. So a kid only takes 7, they're not getting that hours, but they're also not getting, right, they're getting a proportionally less.
So is that 92 hours that are gained, is that all passing time?
Yeah, actually, it's in, the way I see it, it's in 2 places. One is we have, because a whole period was devoted to lunch, a whole 44 minutes was devoted to lunch, and now that's being shrunk to the more customary 30.
Okay.
You're picking up 14 minutes right there.
I'm sorry, just really quickly. This is on page 8. If you look at the comparison, it actually does a really good job of breaking out the difference, showing the amount of passing time, and then the decrease in the lunch from what we have now to what is
Right.
being proposed.
Yeah.
So you can see there, that's, on a daily basis, you're gaining time from a shorter lunch period and from fewer periods of passing. And
Right.
then you multiply that over 173 days, I believe, because you don't include exams.
Yes, we don't include exams.
And so that's
Right.
where you end up getting
So it's
the
really
additional
when-
time.
Yeah, because really what you're doing now is you're running 4 period, by and large, in a simple version, you're running 4 periods a day instead of 8. So instead of, forget the homeroom for a second, so you're picking up a lot of passing time,
Right.
right? So between the passing time and the lunchtime, that's pretty much it.
35 minutes.
So that's we're not lengthening the school day, that's set. We're not lengthening the school year. This is really a more efficient use of the existing time that we have, I guess would be the best way to put it.
But, so if instructional time is going up, how does teaching time not go up? Or if teaching time goes up, do we have that much excess capacity in our teachers that we're not going to need to hire more teachers?
Where are you looking?
I'm just using logic, sorry, it's not on here.
Where are you?
Well, if we're picking up 92 hours, who's going to
Right,
teach
so
that time?
teacher load is determined by number of students. So if they teach a class that's, a simple version, 44 minutes every single day, and they have 100 students, or they have the same 100 students, but it's spread out differently and the classes are longer, there's no impact on the contract, because their contract is based on the load of students they carry, not the number of minutes per period that they teach.
Yeah, I guess logically, it sounds like.
The teachers will be teaching more, is the answer.
Right, okay.
But there's no impact of any, amount, because their load doesn't change. The load is set by contract. So if you could, like, some of them are 125 kids, right? So teach the same 125 kids, teach them every other day for 82, or you teach them every day for 44, whatever it works out to be, it's that the load is 125, or whatever, it varies by area. So that's, yeah, it's not magical, but they're rational
Okay.
here, but that's how it works. It's where districts got in trouble with this way back when this was a big thing was districts were running like a 7-period day, and then they would go to this block with 8 periods, and teachers used to teach, say, 5 out of 7, and all of a sudden they said to the teachers, well, we're going to 8, you're going to now teach 6 out of 8. That's when it blew up. That's when you had to get into all kinds of bargaining. But we already run an 8-period day, and so we already are meeting all the contractual requirements. We're just running the 8-period day differently, more efficiently, and more effectively.
And then I guess just one more question, and then I'll let others go. In terms of the high school construction, I thought I heard at one of the public meetings the other day that we're about a month behind where we thought we'd be. If we fall behind, where do we kind of get to in the point of no return on this schedule? In other words, in your planning process?
I don't think we're behind on the addition piece. That's still moving along fine. So they're going to be able to do what they have to do between now and the Christmas break to get that going. They may need to assign it to a state contract for a short amount of it. Work's going to be beginning soon, right, Greg? They're going to close off a hallway? December 24th. But we're going to build, we're going to close off a hallway, and it's going to go. So that construction is on the timeline. They may have to award the bid in a couple different phases, but they're keeping it on the schedule. In other words, they may need to peel off a 2-week segment before the bid's awarded and give that to a state contract to make sure that it stays on schedule.
Give that to a state contract? What does that mean?
Well, in other words, you don't have to bid something if there's a state contractor who's on the state bid list. So building committee can say, look, we're not going to award the bid till December 15th. They can't mobilize until January 2nd, but we need work done for this 2 weeks. They're allowed under the rules, the reimbursement rules and so forth, to award that 2 week of work to somebody who's authorized to do the work on the state bid list.
Without going out for RFP?
Without going out to bid, right.
Okay. And
right.
So
And so we'll be able to do that. So I think, obviously, there's always a possibility that you wouldn't be completely finished by the start of school, but it's going to be close enough that Mr. Hatzis is going to make it work.
So where are we in the point of no return, though?
We're at the point of no return. We are.
You've already crossed that.
We're gonna. We've crossed the Rubicon.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Fattabine and Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli.
Yeah, we addressed the financial differences to some degree from the prior high school schedule and this proposed high school schedule. But I guess, as you alluded, this has been on the table for a long time, or at least discussed for a long time. And in 2009, there was discussion about the high school schedule. There was a recommendation and proposed change to the high school schedule. It never actually occurred because of financial analysis. But that recommendation came as at that time, what thought was best was an 8-drop-2 schedule. And now we are forward in time to 2014. And we had the same issues, and you mentioned before that the 2 committees that reviewed this in the past have been guided by the same principles.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, you have a different time as well as a different result, but the same guiding principles. So the question arises, is there been any material change of circumstance or fact that makes one better than the other, or is it just simply a difference of opinion or viewpoints of different committees as to why one is better than the other?
Oh, that was a huge discussion by the group, so we'll let them all talk to it.
Fighting over coming up.
Yes, they are. Yes, it's late, they get up early. You're the short straw. This is part of Greg's learning. Jim's hanging back, giving him advice.
As we started the process this time around, we wanted to start with a blank slate. We didn't want to necessarily just say, well, you know, a committee came up with a recommendation 7, 8 years ago, let's just go with that. We wanted to start from scratch. So through that process, you know, we looked really closely at the guiding principles that were developed last time. They all applied, they continue to apply. And actually, I think we may have even added one, which was a real commitment to trying to find a way to give teachers collaborative time. In our current schedule, that becomes really challenging with just the commitment to the contract in terms of providing teachers a lunch period, which is an entire, you know, length of time. I mean, in the contract, it's a 30-minute lunch, but, you know, you really can't get much done in the 14 minutes that are left, you know, of an instructional period. And also, you know, they have a duty as well. So with all of that in mind, we wanted to start from scratch. And so through that process, what we did was every schedule that we looked at, we compared against the guiding principles. The day 1, day 2, in the final analysis, met the guiding principles more fully than the 8-drop-2, and really that's how it evolved. So, you know, we considered it highly, and in fact, we even developed a hybrid that included not just the 8-drop-2 for 4 days of a week, 4 days of a cycle, but an additional 2 days that had something similar to the day 1, day 2, with 4 instructional blocks in the day instead of 6, which is what the 8-drop-2 is. Part of the reasoning behind that is because with a 60-minute period in an 8-drop-2 schedule, you know, with our commitment to additional science time that we've had, there were science teachers that felt that wouldn't be enough time to conduct a lab. You know, currently science teachers get a double block of time, and which is closer to the 85 minutes that we landed on. So that's how that evolved.
Any other questions? Are you all set? Okay, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli?
I just wanted to say a thank you to the staff that ran those meetings. I attended the one at Fairfield Ludlow at night, and it was very informative, responsive to so many questions, you know, acknowledged very openly the work that still had to be done, and I just wanted to thank the staff for putting together a very thorough presentation, very enlightening for everybody there.
On behalf of the staff, thank you. Since I have a microphone and they don't.
Any additional, Mr. Patton?
I should have told Mr. Hatsis to not go anywhere. I'll let you relax for a second, and I can't remember if I may have, after the meeting at Ludlow, which again, I'll echo Jen's comments, that it was very well done. Most of the questions were answered. I know there's still lots of things in flux that you're working on. In terms of things like tests and homework, so if a traditional student has now an 85-minute period where previously a test was only, you know, 1 period long, it's not the plan to have 85-minute exams. So it would be, you know, so the student would have or the class would have an exam, and then there would be instructional time before or after.
For people at home, they're nodding yes.
It's like, they don't really want to come up to the table again. And in terms of things like homework, again, so if you're having a class every other day, but the period is twice as long, you know, a student or a parent could assume, well, that just means they're going to get twice as much homework on the days they have that class. I'm assuming no one's going to, cop to one way or the other definitively, since, again, every teacher can do what they want. But is it really that students would have less homework? Or is more of the work that would be done at home planned to be in class with the new instructional model, because teachers will have to teach twice as long?
So I think it seems that would be a natural conclusion, but that's not what we expect. We expect instruction to be a little different. We expect kids to be able to actually apply some of what they've learned in the class block, which they don't have time to do now. So what we have seen in districts that have adopted the block is that you see more kids doing during the class period, not necessarily homework, but they may be able to apply some of what they've just learned so the teacher can check in and see if they can or can't do it, so the homework can be structured differently. Not twice as much, not like running through 2 lectures or two what we saw previously as 2 different class blocks. So we do expect homework to change. I think one of the benefits is that students now they have 8 classes in one day, 7 or 8 classes. They have to think about homework in 7 different classes each night. They can plan their time a little differently because they'll have assignments from one day and they have 2 days to get it done. So they can be much more flexible. If they have an athletic event or something planned that night, they can themselves plan, well, I can't get to this tonight, but I have another day to get to it.
Okay. And then the other question, I'm not sure who would be able to address this, but in terms of special education or special needs, obviously that's a program that's an entirely different animal. At what point, maybe through the chair to Dr. Title, do we anticipate having more information on how that will work?
Well, that was actually a major consideration in this, and there's some options. This actually presents some additional options for special education services that are not currently available. It was definitely considered through it. Special education teachers were part of it. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. Anybody want to jump in on that? But it was not something that was just put aside, oh, we'll deal with it later. No, it was carefully thought through as to how special education services can be better delivered in the block than they are right now.
Right. There are 2 parts of this. One is we're going to be providing extensive professional development to teachers in learning how to teach in the block. And certainly included in that are special education teachers or teachers who teach collaboratively to special ed classes, so they know exactly how to provide instruction to students during a longer period of time who may have special needs during that time. But the other thing this schedule allows is for us to cut the 85-minute block in half. And so, for example, if we want to provide a support for special ed students every day, we'll have half a block to do that. If we want to provide a math workshop for support in math or other specific support efforts, it won't necessarily have to be for an 85-minute block. It can be for half of the block, and it can happen every day. And so I think that's was a feature of this schedule that we found especially interesting and we were excited about, because it does provide the flexibility of providing support for students who need it.
I think you'll make a lot of parents very happy with that statement.
Okay, we have Mrs. Maxine next, but I just want to say we're almost at 11 o'clock.
That's what I was going to do.
So just, I'm not sure how many more questions board members have, if we want to extend or just adjourn at 11.
We have 7 minutes worth of questions.
Well, I think that's up to the board to decide, so.
I just wanted to make a motion to extend to 11:15.
Mrs. Maxine Kelly makes a motion to extend to 11:15. Anyone seconding? Mr. Llewellyn? Okay, all in favor? Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Maxine Kelly, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Patton, all against? Mr. Fadimine, Mr. Dwyer, passes 4-6.
Since when?
4-2.
4-2, sorry, 4-2 out of 6, yes. Okay, so we will adjourn in 20 minutes. If necessary, but we can certainly adjourn before that. Mrs. Maxine Canelli, did you have a question? Or that was just the motion? Okay, any other questions of the board? No? Well, I guess I just have one question. Just in terms of moving forward, is there some sort of a timeline in terms of, because we've all said that a lot of work has been done, but there's still a lot more to be done. Is there some sort of a timeline when we'll get a kind of a progress report in terms of, well, we're here, I know there have been questions about labs and gym, and people still have outstanding questions, so will there be, are you planning, in January or in February, or do you have a specific date where you feel you'll have more answers to any of those questions? Thank you.
Actually, we have created some subcommittees from the joint leadership, which is the administrative groups from both high schools, to start to break down all the unanswered questions, all the things of how to do this. And our next meeting is December, I think, 10th. And we'll be working in subcommittees, and then we'll start to lay out a plan and potentially a timeline. So we can give you some updates if you'd like that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? No? Okay, we're all set on that agenda item. Thank you. So the next item is committee liaison reports. That was the superintendent.
I'm sorry, I had one other thing I wanted to add. Because the Fairfield rep didn't say this, and Dr. Tyler, you didn't have it on yours, but you had this press release regarding the Fairfield Ludlow High School ranking #1 for 2014 in textiles and design, and I had just wanted to throw that out there to say it public. I didn't want to put the student on the spot because I didn't want to assume that she knew that, but I thought some recognition of that was warranted.
Thank you. Counting on you to do that in open board comment. So
That's what I wasn't sure if that's when I should have done it or not.
That would be perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for noticing that.
Okay. So we have committee liaison reports. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just, I'm sure that board, on committee liaison reports, I'm sure that the board is aware that the RTM considered and acted upon the FEA contract last night, and we had a good showing of teachers in this room, and matter of fact, to the point where the first selectman had to kind of make sure that the door was clear so that the fire marshal wouldn't get here. They approved it 37 in favor, 7 opposed, and 1 abstention. The way the state legislation writes is that the RTM has an ability to reject the contract. So they actually voted 37 against the motion, 7 for the motion. The 1 abstention was by an RTM member whose spouse works for the district, and he felt it would be appropriate to abstain.
Okay, any other committee liaison reports? Okay, the next on the agenda is open board comment. Is there any open board comment, Mr. Patton?
First comment I'd like to make is that's my committee, and I was going to report that, but never
No,
mind.
the FEA contract.
Oh.
Yours is the FSAA contract.
No. I'm the RTM liaison committee, and that's
Well,
a
I'm the liaison
committee
to the
report.
contract.
So it's okay. Not offended. It's been reported in the papers that the Riverfield School project, we had the official groundbreaking either last week or the week before, and not only was it attended by certainly every dignitary, state reps, et cetera, and all our new elected officials, but all the students who sat outside behaved wonderfully, and there was a selection of them that got to wear hard hats and dig into the dirt and do some ceremonial stuff. And the students were very, very excited that all these changes are happening to their school. So, and the other comment that I'd like to make is I'd just like to commend Mrs. Gerber on a phenomenal job as temporary acting chair this evening. Thank you.
Any other open board comment? Mr. Fattabine.
I'd like to also commend the secretary for her role in performing that ad hoc function. You did a great job, and I appreciate you doing that. I just want to indicate that, to piggyback what Mrs. Maxon Kennelly had indicated about Fairfield Ludlow High School ranked #1, for 2014 in textiles and designs. I have a personal knowledge in the fact that we were very highly ranked much prior to that as well, at least back 5 years, having a student going through that program who is, went through the program at Syracuse University as well, and is now a fashion designer in New York working for Joe Fresh. She was well qualified, well prepared, and I think the foundation she received at the Fairfield High School, or Fairfield Ludlow High School program was instrumental in her success in the future. So I know it was a much better, it was an excellent program at that time, not just #1 in 2014.
Thank you. Actually, it's won it several times.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, we'll have to keep track. It's like our budget book.
Yeah.
Right?
Any other open board comment? Seeing none, we move to adjourn. The recommended motion that this regular meeting of the Board of Education adjourned, moved by Mrs. Cannelli, seconded by Mr. Llewellyn. All in favor, raise your hand. We are 6-0, and we adjourn right at 11 o'clock.